Hi guys, welcome back to another exciting video, so sit back, relax, and let's get started. Izumi looked away, and Deku watched her out of the corner of his eye. Okay, Vet, you're up. I wanna hear about your quirk, Izuku commented while keeping eye contact with Vet. Vet blushed a little. My quirk. Well, as you saw last night, I can heal people, but something I didn't know growing up is that that's only half of my quirk. Vet took in a big deep breath, but I suppose I should start from the beginning. My father, as you know, is all for one. He killed my mother to kidnap me. Now, I wasn't unaware of this. When I was 4 years old, he used me for my quirk and tried to poison me against the heroes, and it almost worked. He got scared that he was going to lose me, so he locked me away in a cabin in Othian. It was nice but lonely, Vet said while he kept looking at his gloved hands. Izumi asked the question they all had on their minds. Didn't you try to escape? Vet nodded. I tried, but I was always caught until one day Rhodey's soul jumped the fence. I didn't know it at the time, but he was actually stealing, and he was nearly caught by the heroes. The timing couldn't have been perfect. My father was busy as Hirajiri. All I ever wanted to do was go to the festival in Othian for my birthday. I just wanted one day away from that cabin after 14 years of being locked away. Izuku felt Kyujo stir a little as this had gotten his quirk's attention. So I did it. Vet smiled. I left the cabin with Rhodey. While outside, I learned so much. I've never felt such freedom. It was liberating. I spent 3 days with Rhodey, and while there were moments where I wasn't exactly the smartest, Vet continued to smile as the memories flooded him. I had a blast. All good things come to an end eventually, and not only did my father find me at the festival, but so did Humorize, a cult. It turns out my father had threatened their leader and they wanted me as collateral, but they weren't the only ones. Bakugo never forgot me after 14 years, and he found me as well. He was the one who told me the truth about my mother, as I believe it was the heroes that killed her. Vet's hand gave a tremble as he raised it up. I was warped away, back to the cabin where my real father was waiting. It turns out the one waiting for me was a clone. I confronted him about my mother and he never denied it. In my quirk, Vet's smile faded as his breath trembled. Then, with a shaky hand, he lifted the glove off of his hand. At first nothing looked amiss outside of his fingers. Looking, they were painted black. My quirk awakened. In my betrayal, I found that I can reverse healing if distressed enough, and I grabbed onto my dad for just a little too long and took back all healing I gave him over the years. Vet swallowed thickly. I killed him then and there. I took back my healing, and his head was bashed in on the floor. I went into a screaming panic, and next thing I knew, my quirk was killing everything in its path. This Inkai blackness rose up my arms and body. This looks like nail polish. It's not. It's the other side of my quirk. It's dormant right now, but when it starts to grow up my arm is when it's activated. I killed the trees so fast that they started falling. I killed my garden, and I prayed that one of the trees would fall on the cabin and crush me. Then Rhodey came and I begged him to stay away, but he did and touched me. He hugged me and he didn't die. Vet smiled a sad smile. I ran away with him. After that we fled to Klein, started a farm and farmer's market. Rhodey became a pilot and I became a vet. That's my story. Vet put his glove back on to hide his quirk once more. For the first time in a while, Kyujo spoke. Told you, supervillains don't make good parents. He deserved what he got. Another silence fell over all of them before all eyes turned to Hitomi. Okay, kiddo, it's your turn, Deku told her, and Hitomi looked stunned. Wait, she knocked her feet together again. I'm 13, and I'm not like you guys. I'm her because my mommy got sucked into the light and I tried to stop her with my quirk. Well, Vet squatted down so he was in front of Hitomi. What's your quirk? He inquired softly. Oh, Hitomi's eyes lit up. Full body possession. You see, I have a mixture of my grandmother's telekinesis and my dad's brainwashing. I can bring things to me. She raised her right arm up, focused on her shoes, and in a zip they were in her hands. She lowered them down to the ground, and if I wanted to, I could control one of you and have you move with my own movement. And when we're connected, I can telepathically hear your thoughts, and if I know who you are plus what you look like, I can even send my thoughts directly to you. But you can't talk back if that's the case. Really, can we see? Izuku inquired almost sweetly because, let's face it, they were all curious. Hitomi looked unsure. Not aloud. Mommy made it clear I can't use my quirk willy-nilly because it's powerful and could scare people. Well, a demonstration wouldn't hurt. Look, Deku offered her his hand just to show them what you can do. You can use my body for a few seconds and then let me go, or if you want, I'll tell you when to stop. How's that sound? Hitomi still looked unsure, but in the end she gave in to peer pressure. She looked at Deku. That's all she did, and he was under. His eyes went white and jaw slack. Hitomi stood and started to move her left arm up and down. Deku mirrored this. Incredible. It's even more powerful than Shinsu's. She heard Deku's thoughts as they were now mentally connected. Hitomi then moved her right arm from side to side before she, being the silly girl she was, started dancing to the robot. Once again Deku followed her every movement. That's enough. Once said, Hitomi let him go, which was good because she was already growing tired. She collapsed to the ground and let out soft breaths. Deku rubbed at his eyes as if he was waking out of a dream. Incredible, Deku said. That's a powerful quirk. Mommy said that too. Hitomi grinned before her smile wiped off of her face. I hope she's okay. Who even is your mother? Izumi finally asked. There was a silence, the others knowing exactly where this was going. none more than Deku, who had been picking up on Izumi's not-so-subtle cues. Deku sprung quickly as he pulled Izumi back a little by the shoulders. "Don't get mad," he demanded in an almost firm voice. "Huh?" she asked almost incredulously while looking back at Deku. "Well, she's you but not quite," Hitomi said in a soft voice, "a different you." Oh, Izumi felt she should have seen this kick in the teeth coming. The clues were there after all. Hitomi saying Izumi looked like her mother. Hitomi having telekinesis, one green eye. It was Moss that spoke up. "Weird, I apologize. It's just so weird seeing how in my world Hitoshi is my best friend and my owner. How do you think I feel? He's my brother and my nephew." Izuku yelled with a laugh. "He can't stand me." Deku laughed next. "We've mentioned on multiple occasions how he doesn't want to be friends. I hardly know the guy." Vet waved a hand as he sniggered behind his hands. "I mean, he was with the heroes that saved me, but that's about it." Izumi curled her hands in a fist as she looked away. "He was the one who placed a bet on me. He was the one who played with my emotions so he could get a gaming console and coffee. That's what I was worth to him." Then the silence was back as everyone looked at her. "He called me untouchable, and I will never forgive him for that. I had a feeling it was Himisaga, and you weren't exactly subtle, and you know you tried to stomp on our Hitoshi. I never want to see his stupid face again. I let myself open up to someone for the first time in eons, and he spat it right back into my face. So forgive me for not exactly welcoming the idea of befriending another one." You, Izumi pointed at Izuku, "you know what I mean. Hitoshi and I are working through our issues, and if you ask me, I think you and him need to have a one-on-one. I know what it's like to be so angry that you just let your anger take over, but I never want to see him again, never, because if I see him again I'm gonna, I dunno, punch him again." Hitomi frowned as she put her knees to her chest. "My daddy isn't a bad man," she whispered to Izumi. "Well, it was to me, at least in my world." The silence was loud as everyone just stayed quiet, nobody knowing what to say or do, and it turns out they wouldn't have to do anything, as moments later the door opened when one too many students tried to lean against it to listen better. Kaminari Denki was the first to fall when the door swung open, only to be followed by Minta, Mina, and Achako. It surprised no one to see Shinsu standing behind everyone else, his face a look of horror, his eyes wide and his skin pale while his hand was to his mouth. "Guys," Deku gasped in surprise while the others quickly stood up and all looked on edge, looking at those that had not just been listening on their story, but those that had invaded this space and reminded them that they were still very much inside of a school. "Oh hey." Deku Achako stood quickly and tried to make herself look as nonchalant as possible by leaning against a wall. "Come here often." Her laugh was forced as she couldn't meet his eyes, knowing that she got very much caught. "Whoa," Kaminari whispered as he looked at all the other Izukus and Izumi as well as Hitomi. "This is freaky. What are you guys doing?" Deku yelled while Minta and Kaminari got up with Mina. "We saw you get your clothes, man, and so got curious because you never came back. So followed you here and we're listening in. What about class? You know Monday is study hall during this time. We just told Mr. Aizawa we were going to library once we hunted you down," Mina said nonchalantly as she stepped in and looked at everyone closely. "Look at you." She smiled at Vet. "You're so chubby. Deku, you should gain some weight." "Stop it. You guys need to leave, like, right now." Deku tried to urge them out the door. "So, what we heard is true. You are all from another universe?" Kaminari demanded as he approached Deku with Achako. Izuku crossed his arms over his chest and made a face when Minta approached him. "You touch me, you'll be eating your own teeth," he threatened, and Minta looked both offended and intrigued when he put his hand on his chest. "I would never. Are you okay?" It was Hitomi's voice that made the others turn. Izumi had found a corner and placed herself in it, her eyes never once leaving Kaminari as she looked fearful. Fearful of Kaminari. Minta got a beady look in his eyes when he looked at Izumi and has started to approach. At first Deku figured it was because of Hitoshi's presence. Hitoshi didn't dare step foot into the room, but oh, how wrong Deku was. "No." Deku pulled Minta back. "Leave." "Oh, come on. It's you that's a chick. I mean, look at her. Yeah, the clothes are a little baggy, but she's still rather smoking." Kaminari took this moment to approach her. "Don't mind him. I'm sure your Minta is just as bad, right?" Kaminari got too close. What he saw in that moment was Izumi peeping her arm back, her face twisted into a scared snarl, and he had no time to react when she punched him directly in the throat. "Stay away from me," she all but screamed when Kaminari went down wheezing and clutching his throat. "You stay the fuck away from me." There was an outroar as immediately Vet and Izuku rushed in, Vet grabbing Izumi and pulling her away from Kaminari and towards him while Izuku grabbed Kaminari from under his arms and dragged him away. "Oh my god." Deku rushed in and helped Izuku with Kaminari as Kaminari was wheezing and his face turning a nasty shade of red. "Why would you do that?" Hitomi yelled as she stood in alarm. Moss ran to Kaminari just the same as the others and tried to comfort him as he was finally able to breathe. Izumi then said something nobody was expecting. "Because in my universe, he tried to kill me," she whispered, her whole body shaking. Okay, we're going to walk away, Vet whispered to her as he started to lead her away from Kaminari and towards the farthest side of the room. She was still shaking, and never once did she take her eyes off of Kaminari. Kaminari would eventually breathe again, and boy did he gulped in several loud and deep breaths on the floor while others surrounded him. Once he was conscious, did Deku speak. Do you see why we can't have you guys in here? Their experiences with you guys are all vastly different from my own personal experience. You can't just waltz in and expect to be friends, Deku told Kaminari gently, and Kaminari only gave another wheeze. Sorry, he finally croaked before laying his head on the ground. Minta looked rather bashful as well as he rubbed at the back of his neck, and Ochako turned towards Izumi. What did he do exactly? She finally asked, and Izumi only glanced at Ochako before looking away. He looked me in a utility closet over the weekend. There was a blanket under the door, and the AC doesn't run during the weekend. I was trapped in that closet for 8 hours before I was found. He also attacked me at my place of work, but that was less severe. Dude, why'd you do that? Minta inquired. I didn't. Kaminari protested, his voice still sounding hoarse. Mina took a few cautious steps towards Izumi but made sure to stop out of punching range. Well, what happened to you was bad, and your Kaminari sounds awful. Kaminari wouldn't dream of doing something like that. Izumi didn't look too convinced as her eyes just stayed narrowed. Yeah, I'm not even sure he's smart enough to think of a plan like that. Minta chimed in, which earned him a sharp dude from Kaminari. Izumi looked away from them. Forgive me for not being convinced. The Kaminari in my world was good at playing dumb. Just stay away from me, and the same goes to you. She pointed at Shinsu, who was still standing stunned in the doorway. I don't care if I'm in another world. I want nothing to do with either of you. Well, she made her stance quite clear and finished it by crossing her arms over her chest and turning to look out the window. Please, Deku now huddled Mina with Kaminari. Might and Ochako leave before you get caught. Deku sighed in defeat when Toshinori and Aizawa both stepped into the doorway. Aizawa's hand was as quick as a whip when he grabbed Shinsu's collar by his fist as the boy tried to flee. There was several loud seconds of silence between everyone before Hitomi broke it. Oh, you're all in trouble. Tamura Shigaraki's throne was his, again, and this made Izuku smile as he twiddled his thumbs in his lap. Tamura and his gang of goons fled some time ago, no doubt to warn others of Izuku's arrival, as it became clear that Izuku wasn't messing around. Izuku was to be feared, and they all knew this. That was fine. Let them run, let them tell the heroes or even the living all for one in this world. It didn't matter to Izuku. Why? Well, are you almost ready? Izuku asked as he put his elbow on the throne and held himself up by his fist. The person was someone who couldn't get away in time. Tomoyasu Chikazoku, or also known as the villain skeptic, the villain who was going to show Izuku to this new world. A villain, an unknowing example of what's to come. The man was quacking as he should be. He should have fled when the others did, but he didn't, and now he's entangled in Izuku's web. A fly that thought if he held still then maybe the spider would leave him alone long enough to get free. I am getting there, skeptic told Izuku in a shaking voice as he walked around a dead body. He dared to look at Izuku. Izuku narrowed his dual-colored eyes at skeptic, and the man ducked down quickly as he typed quickly at his laptop and found a spot on the floor away from the bodies. I just need a few more minutes, my lord. HMPH, Izuku grumbled and raised his head to the ceiling as he sucked in a slow breath. I remember my paranormal liberation army, he told skeptic, the one in my world, that is. Yeah. The man whispered, are we free? Allowed to use our quirks as the gods intended? Izuku smirked. Oh, you're free all right, just not in the way you want. Skeptic swallowed hard and went back to typing. Izuku could hear him mumbling softly to himself, I can't believe they just left me shoals. There was more silence, and Izuku crossed one leg over the other while he waited and grew more impatient. Finally, Skeptic nodded and looked at Izuku. We're going to go live in 5 minutes. Izuku grinned. Perfect. Izumi Shinsu followed Athos through the thick trees surrounding Yue, but not crossing the threshold. Not that they could, as neither of them currently go there. Athos looked around, looking at almost every tree before he nodded and pointed that one. He briskly walked up to a certain tree. This is the tree I usually climb to take a sneak peek into Yue. Athos then started to climb quickly up the tree, and Izumi watched him. She, like him, had her hood up and face covered. She also had a new set of binoculars dangling from her wrist. So, I take it you don't go to Yue? She inquired as she activated float and floated upwards. Athos found a branch that was above the Yue fence so they could see inside the schoolyard. Athos looked at Izumi, and even though his eyes were hidden, she watched as his eyebrow still rose at her using float. I'm quirkless, of course I didn't go to Yue then. Well, it doesn't matter. Athos shook his head. Izumi sat on a sturdy and thick branch that lightly dipped from her weight. She then disengaged float and looked at the schoolyard. She then grabbed the binoculars from around her wrist and brought them to her eyes. Izumi stayed quiet as she looked around for any familiar faces. At first she didn't see anyone familiar while she kept her eyes on the school and the students walking around. Crunch. Izumi slowly lowered the binoculars and looked at Athos. Athos had a bag of Cheetos in his hands and stopped eating to look at her, a Cheeto still in his mouth. Cheeto, he offered, and Izumi just sighed and shook her head before looking back through her binoculars. Where are your binoculars? She inquired while looking around the schoolyard. She did see a few familiar faces, Nobody from class 1 or 1B, where she'd be at this point in time, but faces she remembered seeing the hallways or even in the cafeteria. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I'm poor, I can't afford such a luxury, Athos said with his mouth full that made Izumi suck in a deep breath inside to try and calm herself. You have a knife and a bat. I have a few more weapons than you're aware of in all actuality, and I never bought such things, they were given to me, Athos said matter-of-factly before shoving another handful of Cheetos into his mouth. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Well, was all Izumi could say before she focused back on people watching. At first, she once again saw nothing until crunch, crunch. Izumi snatched Athos's Cheetos and tossed them, using a bit of one for all to send the snack flying up into the air and away from them. Shut up, she hissed at him, I can't concentrate. While menopause be hitting hard, huh? Izumi grabbed his collar and yanked him towards her. I will smack you. She brought Athos a little closer with each word, and he got the hint. Gotcha, he said with a bit of a laugh before he put his hands up. Izumi let him go but made sure he was still safe on his own branch. She then grabbed her binoculars and looked back towards UA where she was looking before she threw Athos's snack to the heavens. She saw another version of herself, only clearly this one was a boy. He was using one for all to rush towards the dorms. Athos looked towards the dorms. That another one of us, right? Izumi inquired just to be sure. She handed the binoculars to Athos. Athos took them and peeked through the binoculars as she requested. She kept her eyes towards the dorms despite the boy being too far away now. Yeah, I'd say so, Athos whispered and handed the binoculars back to her. He's running around the school, so I'd say he probably goes there. Looks like he had a quirk. Yeah, I'm sure it's the same quirk that I have, Izumi told Athos as she looked back towards the dorms. What should I call him? Izumi wondered out loud as she didn't have a name for this boy. Izuku, is that your name? Izumi inquired as she looked at Athos, and Athos looked away from her. A long time ago it was, he whispered in such a soft voice that she almost missed it. Izumi put the binoculars back to her face and looked towards the dorms again. It took a few long agonizing minutes before Deku emerged from the dorms. He had clothes in his arms and was using one for all to propel himself forward. He had clothes in his hand, Izumi said as she turned to look at Athos. Athos hummed and thought as he leaned his back against the tree. Interesting. But if this one is in UA and in the hero course, then maybe he has extras because of Kaken. How do you know he's in the hero course? He went into the one at dorms, Athos shrugged, and Izumi snorted. Fair, and that's not a bad assumption. I know when I was in UA, I constantly had to change my clothes when paired with Kaken, but Izuku had 2 sets of clothes, which is interesting. So, you went to UA. When was this? 40 years ago. Izumi started to wind up her first, and Athos flinched with a laugh as he put his hands up, not the face. Izumi snorted and grabbed her binoculars again. I don't see my daughter, which is both a blessing and curse, she mumbled while she continued to look around. Well, she wouldn't be outside. Athos crossed his ankles, and Izumi looked at him. She'd be inside being protected. You're right, she would be if she were there. Izumi bit her lip as she looked at the school and frowned. If she's not, then the only place I can think she could be is back at the apartments, but we wouldn't be there and she would find out quickly. The agency isn't there either, so she must be so scared if she's not in UA. Well, let's go and check. Izumi's head snapped towards Athos as the boy hopped off the branch and grabbed onto the one below him. He started to clamber down the tree with impressive agility. Whoa, wait. Izumi yelled as she jumped from the branch and used float to descend her way down with ease. They both hit the ground at the same time, and the boy looked at her. You really just like to gloat, don't you? He asked her as he walked towards UA. Izumi used Black Whip to yank him back. He looked both stunned and impressed at this. You're talking about breaking into UA, the most guarded school in all of Japan. We'd be labeled as villains faster than you can blink. Understand? We can't just do that, Athos. I know a spot. Athos shrugged and Izumi gave him an incredulous look. What? I know a spot? He repeated like it was a question as he put his hands on his hips. Lady, you give UA too much credit. There are tons of blind spots all over the place, for one. And for two, it wouldn't be my first time breaking into this school. Izumi knew. Her jaw dropped at that admission because Athos's eyebrows and the corners of his eyes rose into a smile. Yeah, bet you weren't expecting that. I've broken into this school at least for maybe 5 times. It's fun watching Eraserhead have an aneurysm every time I make myself known in the vents. You scare me. As I should. Athos then turned. Follow me. I'll show you the blind spot. And if it's not there? Izumi inquired as she crossed her arms over her chest, and Athos only shrugged. Who knows? Stop overthinking. I never think, and look at me. Izumi rolled her eyes. This gremlin was gonna get her killed. She just knew it. How are we the same person? She finally asked with a heavy sigh, and she pinched the area between her eyes. We're not, and that's the fun thing. Athos started to walk backward as he continued to talk. Now, let's go, Grandma, before you get any more gray. I'm not gray. Izumi yelled at him and he walked forward. Your roots tell me otherwise. Now, let's go. Something happened, something that left everyone Not just in UA, but all of Japan stunned. As Ochako, Deku, Mina, Kaminari, and Shinsu were all being scolded by the two teachers as the others looked away out of awkwardness when there was an outcry. The issue was that the outcry was everywhere and made them all sit up a little straighter, and some even stood. Moss's ears twitched before he also stood from Tomi's lap. Dad. He called Shouta as he got low and looked around everywhere like he was afraid something was going to spring up on them and attack them. The TV. You need to turn the TV on. Aizawa looked bewildered, but with those outcries growing louder and more worried from the students in their classroom. He did just that. He found the remote in the room and turned on the TV setting. He didn't have to channel chase as it was right there for all of them to see. It was one of them, only this one didn't belong. This one was sitting in a throne almost lackadaisically. He was surrounded by bodies of heroes, of people. BLD and gore by his feet, his pale face splattered with BLD, making it look like he had a second set of red freckles. He looked older than them. That was, he wore a suit, a nice three-piece black suit that was also coated in BLD. Along with the black gloves that covered his hands, his hair was white, but wild and curly, and his eyes were different colors, one red, one green. For Izumi, something stuck out to her. This Izuku had a tattoo, one on his neck that had to be painful to get. It looked like a dotted line, and at the end were a pair of scissors with only 2 words, cut here. Oh my god, he's insane, Izumi realized. Not just her, but they all realized. Izuku let out a small cry as he stood. His own eyes were alternating between red and green as if they weren't sure who wanted to be in control at that moment. There were outcries from their own room now, as it seemed like everyone were fearful of the man behind the screen. Vet put his hands to his mouth and had to turn away as sweat started bead down his brow. Deku paled visibly, making his freckles stand out greatly along his skin. Hitomi grabbed onto Hitoshi's hand as she buried her face into his side to look away from the horror on the screen. Hitoshi allowed this with no fuss as he even patted the girl on the back. His already pale skin growing paler. Moss let out a loud hiss and stood on his toes, his back arching upwards and his pupils dilating into slits. Kaminari, Ochako, and Mina all were shaking and their lips trembled. They looked at Deku, and Deku just swallowed hard. Toshinori looked like he was going to pass out, and Aizawa had his hands in tight fists. Deku, is he one of them? Aizawa inquired after a passing silence between all. And no, he's not. Deku just kept shaking his head. He wasn't in my dream unless. Deku grabbed his throat with a pained look on his face. Hello. All the man spoke, and a hush fell not just upon them but upon all of UA, probably all of Japan, even through a screen. This man's aura, it was horrifying. My name is Izuku Midoriya, but you can all call me All for One. So there's no confusion between myself and my counterparts. A smile graced his lips as he said this. God, how they wished he just wouldn't smile. You see, this isn't my universe. In my universe I had won, the heroes dead at my feet, all the quirks I could ever want, and an army of villains at my every beck and call. But such a life can be quite. His smile grew. His canines looked sharp and wicked, like he wasn't human but an animal on the prowl. Boring. So, with inventors on my side, I found a way to travel between universe, and I learned that not every universe is the same. Would you believe that? He laughed like it was all one big funny joke, and he pointed to himself. In this world I'm a hero. I actually want to save humanity instead of destroy it. He continued to laugh for a few more seconds before he calmed down and stared at the camera, stared like he was staring at them, his eyes cold, no light in them whatsoever, no love, nothing. So I figured, why not make another playground? Why not have some fucking fun? Why not do it all over again? I am going to kill you all, and I'm going to laugh while doing it, he told the camera. And for just a moment, the outcry was back of scared high schoolers before the panic was stilted down. Ochako and Kaminari grabbed onto each other with Mina in the middle as they shook. Hitomi put her hands over her ears and let out soft whimpers. I'm not the only one that doesn't belong here. Oh no, there are 7 of us, myself included, that don't belong. I know they're all probably watching this, but so are the heroes. So let me give you heroes all a warning. Black Whip shot from All for One's hand, and there was a sudden cry of alarm before he stood from his throne. Despite his small stature, he grabbed the man by the neck once the man was in reach, and he grinned a maniacal grin to the camera. The man kicked and struggled, but there was nothing he could do. Energy was transferred down All for One's arm and shot into this man, and then he was nothing. The man became a red mist in the air. I'm going to be sick, Vet whispered as he grabbed on this hair and turned away from the video feed. I can't go back to the cabin. I can't go back, he whispered to himself frantically. Hitomi let out a scream of fear and started to loudly cry while burying herself even deeper into Hitoshi's side, like she was trying to fuse with him. Izumi's mouth had gone dry as she shivered in place. Hyujo and Izuku were still alternating between one another as they put their hands over their eyes and let out scared cries. We won't go back to him, we won't. They yelled together at the exact same time. Toshinori had a hand on Deku's shoulder while Deku shook in place, and Moss had jumped into Aizawa's arms and was also shaking. 2 born without quirks, 1 reborn again, 2 given a great power made to stop an ancient evil, 1 split in 2 born with the ability of mine, and 1 born with the ability to heal as well as to kill. You all know who you are, all of you other versions of myself out there. Let me repeat that just in case you didn't hear. 2 born without quirks, 1 reborn again, 2 given a great power to stop an ancient evil, myself, 1 split into 2 born with the ability of mind and 1 born with the ability to heal as well as to kill. You know who you are, and more importantly, I know who are you. I know your quirks or lack thereof, and I'm coming for you, all of you. I guess you can say I'm killing myself in the worst possible way. He smiled that manacle smile again. See you all very soon. Then the feed cut out when All for One attacked the laptop. Then came the screams that rose through UA like it was a horror house, panicked students and teachers alike. But not that room. While they were stunned and scared, they didn't scream. Well, Hitomi did, but she was just a child and it was only natural for her to do so. But the rest? No. Izumi swallowed hard as she looked around at the others, all with pale and scared faces equal to hers, no doubt. He already had one for all. Deku whispered. He used Black Whip. This isn't because he wants the quirk, he's telling the truth. He's doing this because he's bored with his own world and he brought us all here. He swallowed thickly as his eyes looked like we're going to bug out of his skull. What are we going to do? Hitomi continued to cry into Hitoshi's chest. I want my mom. She'd know what to do. I hate to say this, I want your mother too. I think if I'm right, out of all of us, she's the only one who went up against All for One and won, but I know you too. Izuku and Vet also defeated All for One. So, maybe it'll be okay, Deku whispered. Then he turned towards Izuku. He looked different. His hair was white, yes, but it was also curly with mesh of green in it. His hands were no longer over his eyes. But it was clear he was crying with fear. His eyes were two-toned red on top and white on the bottom. Izuku, or is it Kyujo? Deku inquired cautiously. Kyuzuko, when we're like this we're fused, Kyuzuko whispered as he continued to shake. I see. Izuku mentioned going toe-to-toe with All for One. We couldn't beat him. Not without help. We didn't kill him, our father, Shouta Aizawa did. Deku looked at Vet. It was an accident. Vet yelled immediately. I told you this. I didn't mean to kill him. Oh god. Vet had, at some point, taken his gloves off and was looking at his hands, true to his words earlier that day. The blackness was growing along his fingers and threatening to creep up even higher. Nobody come near me. He yelled to the others as he stayed in a corner, but not touching anything with his hands. Moss, Deku turned towards the cat. What about you? Moss looked down. All for One, in my world, is rotting in prison. No successor, nothing. He's going to die soon. I did not fight him, not even a little. Deku sighed and rubbed his mouth before looking at the teachers. What are we going to do? There has to be something. We, Aizawa asked before he shook his head. There is no we. Kid Izuku, he made a threat on your life. You and the others are going to be staying here. As much as I wish that were the case, my dear, shouted Nezu. Quietly walked through the door, his head and ears low and his attitude a lot less chipper. It can't be done. I'm sorry, but the HPSC just called. They are aware of the situation and I was forced to tell them that we have 4 or 5, if you count young Hitomi, of the 7, going to all be transferred there and forced into questioning, as this is now a case of national security. No, Kyuzuko all but screamed, putting all eyes on them. We won't go back. We won't. There was now an even more panic in his eyes. Before, as he backed into a window, he looked like a cornered animal. Now they shook their head wildly. We won't. We can't. Not again, please, not again. They sniffled before covering their face with their hands. They'll be here in less than 10 minutes. I'm afraid, Nezu explained, and this time it was Moss the cat giving an angry hiss at the idea as he put his translator up for the time being. A hiss that Nezu seemed to understand. I'm aware it's less than ideal. I don't understand. Izumi looked at Moss and then at Kyuzuko. The HPSC has helped us for so long, it shouldn't. It only makes sense they want to question us and make sure we're safe. If you think this is about safety, you're wrong, dead wrong. And blind. They don't care about the public at all. They torture people. Those who don't have the ideal quirks are tossed like trash. We would know firsthand. There was silence again. Maybe for your world. Ochako was the one to break the silence. Maybe for your world, she repeated again, this time slower. It could be like with Kaminari and Izumi. Maybe it's different for us at least. More silence. I'm sorry, Nezu said once again, but it's the way it has to be for now. My hands are tied. They'll be sending a convoy to pick you all up and we'll personally see them do this. The 10 minutes were like torture for all. The silence loud as nobody wanted to speak or had anything to say. Aizawa did use his quirk on Vet, and Vet was thankful as his withering died down long enough for him to get a hold on his emotion. The representative showed a woman with a clipboard, and she looked at all of them. Okay, well, let's go ahead and round up all of you. She pointed at Izuku and then at the others. We're not going, Kyuzuko snarled as he kept himself against the wall. The woman had an almost coy smile on her face. My eyes don't deceive me. Your tongue, it's purple. You've been on block, haven't you? She asked with a gleam in her eyes, and Kyuzuko bristled visibly. Block? Deku inquired to Toshinori. Toshinori licked his lips. It's one of the most powerful quirk suppressants out there, made to combat trigger or those with wild and powerful quirks. Toshinori explained to everyone it's made similarly to trigger, which is why it can turn the tongue purple. The thing is, it's only an HPSC drug. You're a naughty boy. Been to one of our facilities in your world, have you? The woman said as she stepped up to Kyuzuko. But worry not. We're not going to put you only block if you behave and put that quirk away. That is, she told him, and Izuku didn't look impressed as he contemplated this. After a minute or two of silence, Kyujo and Izuku would inevitably unfuse, Kyujo giving Izuku full control, but staying on standby. Smart lad, and now what about you? She pointed at Hitomi. You're not one of them, I can tell, but I have a feeling you don't belong here. Hitomi continued to cling to Hitoshi. I'm Hitomi Shinzo, daughter of Izumi and Hitoshi Shinzo, she would tell the lady honestly. The woman only cooed another Izumi. We need to keep an eye out for then. Okay. We'll take her, and I guess we'll go ahead and take this Hitoshi as well. I have a feeling he plays a role in this. Hey, I'm not a part of this, Hitoshi yelled, and the woman shrugged. Sorry, rules are rules. You are a part of it along with them too. We'll take those students as well. She pointed to Ochako, Mina, and Kaminari as well. Come on, I'm just a bystander, Kaminari argued. No can do. The woman shrugged. This is weird now that I think about it. How are we still missing two? What do you mean? Aizawa inquired as he took his eyes off of Vet long enough for another representative to put quirk suppressants on his wrist. Vet looked thankful for this. Well, it seemed like, with the story Nedzu given us, everyone has been found by mere coincidence. One was outside the dorms, one came into the wrong room. The girl was found by one of your students by mere happenstance, and the cat was found by you, so why on earth are there still two missing? It's clear something wants all of them to meet, right? Aizawa thought about it. They had a point, but nobody had the answer. I guess they'll come in due time. We're wasting time. Let's load everyone up. The woman hummed. Quirk suppressants cuffs were slapped on those with quirks. Hitoshi, Hitomi, Ochako, Kaminari, and Mina all included, while Izumi and Moss were the only ones without them for obvious reasons. The convoy was 2 SUVs, 1 armored truck, and 2 more SUVs, each with 2 people in the front to make sure everyone got inside and that there was no funny business. Shouta, Toshinori, and Nedzu could only follow and watch as several of their students' children, grandchildren, and pet were brought out to the convoy. Ready when you are. Another HPSC representative slapped the armored truck that all the children were shoved into for their own protection. A hand popped out of the driver's side, a black-gloved one, and flashed the man a silent thumbs up. I hope you can forgive me, Nedzu told Shouta just as the convoy was leaving. I know your students were in there, but it must be done. The convoy was soon out of UA and heading down the street, but just know they're not going to make it to the HPSC. Huh. Both teachers turned to Nedzu, and the rodent was smiling brightly once more as he clapped his furry paws. Oh yes, you see, the most interesting thing happened as I was wandering about the vents earlier. I happened to run into not just Hitomi's mother, but another Izuku as well. He goes by Athos, quite a card, I must say. Of course, I invited them for tea and cookies. Mrs. Shinsu was a little apprehensive as she wanted to be sure her daughter was there. Once I assured her that Hitomi was safe and even showed her the camera feed, she finally sat down and talked to me. He grinned now, an almost evil grin. They were in the office when the HPSC called and listened to the whole thing. Both have strong feelings towards the HPSC, neither good, so we all came up with a plan. If all should go right, they're getting ready to deviate from the HPSC any minute now. After all, Mrs. Shinsu assured me that, despite her usually using her quirk to get places, she was quite good behind the wheel. Nedzu smiled, turned, and waltzed away. Oh, and before I forget, Athos told me the 2 drivers are in the dumpster, alive, but not silly. So, you two should probably go and make sure nobody dumps trash on them. How on earth? Toshinori whispered as he looked to where the convoy once was. You saw how many cars were clearly following them, right? How could they knock 2 people out, bring them to a dumpster, and take their place? You know, I've learned to stop questioning the tenacity of my problem children. At this point, it'll just bring me more grades and an eventual heart attack. For now, let's just hope they get somewhere safe. Getting the 2 HPSC drivers out of the armored truck hadn't been easy. During this time, there were only 2 cars in front of the truck, as the other 2 behind the truck was separated by traffic, as the all-for-one message had caused a panic in the city, for good reason, of course. So, Athos and Izumi didn't hesitate. They watched the first 2 cars and saw that those cars only had 1 person behind the wheel instead of 2. They were in a panic. They wanted to get here as fast as possible. Athos told Izumi as he handed her back her binoculars. The 2 of them were off in the distance by the dorms. Izumi stretched her arms out as she prepared for a struggle. How are we going to do this? She inquired, and Athos smiled at this and pointed at himself. You're asking me. I thought you were the pro hero. Yeah, well, you never think and I overthink, so let's give your idea a go, she told him, and Athos's smile never dropped as he looked towards the armored truck. There were several seconds before he nodded. I'm going to go low and slow and bring them to me. Trust me, I know what ticks off the HPSC. Athos grinned, showing the missing tooth gap. Once again, I want you by the dumpsters. Wait for me. Stay safe. Izumi didn't like the idea of leaving Athos to do this alone, but she knew he was the crazy they needed right now. If she tried, they'd get caught for sure. So Izumi swallowed her fear down and jogged off towards the dumpsters. And good luck, she added. Athos was grinning as he crouched low and quietly stalked across UA. He knew he was going to need to be quick. Before the final 2 cars got there, silently made sure he was out of the mirrors and went up to the driver's side window. His hoot was up. Check goggles on. Check mask over his face. Check. Once he was sure he wouldn't be identified, he put his plan into action. He simply stood up and knocked on the window. Luck was on their side, it seemed, as a woman rolled the tinted window down a crack. HPSC official business. Move along, the woman bluntly told him before she went to roll the window up. Athos stood there but didn't move. He just stared inside. The woman rolled the window down a crack again. Move along, sir. Don't you have class? Athos grinned at her, but she couldn't see it. Instead, he cleared his throat. I just saw one of the Midoriyas hiding by the dumpster. You have to hurry. She mentioned something about leaving. He told the lady, and her eyes went wide in surprise at this as she looked at her partner. We should inform the other two, her partner, a man said, and Athos shook his head. You can't. The woman, I think she's a pro hero. You better get the jump on her before she gets away. Hurry, I'll lead the way. Athos skipped a step and made like he was going to run. His plan worked, and the woman's door opened as she went to follow him, she and her partner. The HPSC has gotten sloppy, he thought with a grin. Fusey, a new voice added as one of the car doors opened, and the woman Fusey looked towards the SUV and shook her head. We'll be back, checking something out. Stay there and wait for the others. She called to the person, and obediently the door would shut what wouldn't shut. The doors to the armored truck as both driver and passenger went with Athos. This way, hurry, he ordered once he got towards the dorms and waved his arm wildly. They followed his frantic movements and picked up the pace. You have to hurry. I don't want to die, he cried as he ran behind the dorms. He was faster than them now, at least a few good 100 yards ahead of them. Athos ran towards the dumpsters. Now, the pungent smell hitting his nose hard. Izumi was leaning against one of the dumpsters looking anxious. When she saw him, she perked up. Athos grinned to himself. There she is, he called, and she looked shocked when two HPSC members rounded the corner. They were both out of breath and were quick to try and rush her. Izumi was faster before they made it to her. Izumi leaped in the air, did a flip, and landed on the closed dumpster with ease. You have to come with us, Fusey tried to say, despite being out of breath, but she never got to finish as Athos grabbed his trusty bat that he's been hiding nearby, approached her and swung, hitting the back of her head with ease. Fusey grunted and went down. Her partner turned towards him, but Izumi was quick. Using Black Whip, she grabbed the man and pulled him towards her just a bit before kicking him directly in the face, knocking him out immediately. That was your plan, Izumi panted, and Athos pulled his mask down before grinning. It worked, didn't it? He inquired, and she snorted before putting her hands on her hips. Athos leaned down and grabbed Fusey. Help me get her in the dumpster. Use those muscles. The dumpster. Why? We can't leave them in plain sight. Athos yelled at her. If someone finds them, it'll raise the alarm. They're alive. Just knocked a little silly. We're just gonna put them in the dumpster so nobody raises the alarm. I don't know about that, Athos. What if the trash gets taken out? They'll die. Not if we tell Nedzu. I'd listen to him. Deku, stay out of this. Kaken. Both Izumi and Athos turned immediately to see Bakugo leaning against the fence. Oh my god, Izumi whispered as she approached him. It was clearly not her Bakugo. This one was far too young. Izumi couldn't help herself. She squished his face in her hands. You're a baby, she gasped, and Bakugo let out a roar before his eyes turned white with anger. Get off of me, Grandma. Also, you want to repeat that? You aren't my Deku. I'll beat your ass from here to next Sunday. He all but roared at her. Izumi and Athos both tried to shush him. What are you doing here? Athos inquired as he lifted his hood and lowered his mask at will to show Bakugo that he wasn't a threat, just another Izuku. Bakugo huffed as he crossed his arms over his chest. I was watching you, making sure you didn't mess up that stupid plan of yours. That's what I'm doing here. I see. Well, we don't have much time. Someone helps me get these two in the dumpster, and let's get the hell out of Dodge. Athos put his mask and hood back on as he turned and grabbed Fusey by her arms and started to drag her towards the dumpster himself. I'm coming with you too, Bakugo said matter-of-factly as he watched them for several seconds. Oh no, you're not. Izumi could only shake her head as she grabbed the guy by his arms and easily hoisted him over her shoulder. It's too dangerous. You think I give a shit? I don't. Let me rephrase it for you, Grandma. I'm coming. No ifs, ands, or buts. If you don't, I'll tell the HPSC that I'm a part of this as well, and I'll rat you both out. Bakugo stepped up to Izumi, and the two of them just stared at one another, Izumi not wanting to back down and Bakugo not give up. There was a crash, and Athos got the woman in the dumpster. I'd say bring him. Athos shrugged. We don't have time to argue, and if he wants to go on a suicide mission, I'm not gonna stop him. You need me, Bakugo hissed, and Izumi felt herself pull a face. And you know it, Princess. He then pointed at her. Fine, Izumi relented as she put the man in the dumpster with the woman. Let's go, we've wasted enough time. Getting to the van was easy. They all stayed low, and with the doors to the van still open, it provided cover for them. Izumi was in the driver's seat while Bakugo sat in the passenger seat, and Athos sat between them. As soon as she shut the doors, final two cars pulled up. No questions were asked. No doubt the others didn't care, or they assumed it was a failed mission. Either way, it helped them. Athos informed Nedzu of the two in the dumpster via a walkie-talkie and informed Nedzu of Bakugo joining them. Less than 5 minutes later, the others were being let out. Izumi watched out of the mirrors. That's crazy, she whispered as she spotted all the others being let out. She knew she'd be seeing other versions of herself, but she never thought there are others. Bakugo grumbled, and Izumi spotted Hitoshi, Ochako, Kaminari, and Minta being led into the van, the same as her daughter. Hitomi looked scared as she was being led away in cuffs. Izumi frowned at this, but knew the precaution the HPSC was under. No doubt everyone was being led away in cuffs, save for two, and a version of herself and the cat her other self was holding. Someone slapped the side of the van, making Izumi jump. Ready to go when you are. This person yelled back, and Izumi spotted Netsu, Shouta, and Toshinori in her mirror. Izumi rolled down her window, to the horror of Athos and Bakugo, and only gave a silent thumbs up. Netsu smiled. He understood. Izumi quickly retracted her hand and rolled the window back up. Don't do that shit again. Bakugo growled at her. You'll get us caught. Just letting Netsu know, she whispered while she buckled herself in. Bakugo and Athos did this as well. They knew they were in for a wild ride after all, hijacking a HPSC vehicle and its occupants. It won't be easy. The first two cars took off, and Izumi was right behind them. She kept the speed normal and her grip on the wheel tight. They rolled out of UA quickly and soon were on the road. The first 10 minutes were filled with stiff silence. There wasn't a way to hear what was going on in the back of the truck. No partition wall. Nothing, which was nice. It would ensure this could work. Then Athos started messing with the radio. He changed the stations, messed with knobs, and was just acting all out. Bored finally, Bakugo snatched Athos's wrist. Pick a station, Bakugo demanded, and Athos grinned at this before he noticed that there appeared to be a CB radio in the truck. Ew. Athos grabbed the receiver. Should we talk to the local truckers? He asked as he clicked it on. Hey, this is Athos. Bakugo snatched the receiver out of Athos's hand. Knock it off before I knock you out, Bakugo roared, and Izumi shook her head as the two of them struggled for the receiver. You never let me have fun, Kakin, Athos yelled as he tried to pry the receiver out of Bakugo's hands. Don't call me that. You don't get to call me that. Knock it off, you two. We're coming up to the highway, Izumi yelled at the two boys. What's going on up there, Fusey? Came a voice from the CB radio. It was a radio to the entire convoy. Give me that. Izumi snatched the receiver out of both of their hands with a growl. Before she thought about what she wanted to say, she turned it on and spoke calmly. Apologies. I accidentally turned the receiver on while retelling a story. Then she hung it up quickly. Athos snorted. Woo. That's the best you could come up with, Grandma. Yep, now hang on, Izumi yelled as she saw the highway. The convoy wouldn't be going to the highway, not to the HPSC headquarters, but she would be. Izumi put her foot on the gas and the engine revved loudly. At this, she swiftly merged into the next lane towards the exit at the last second, causing the entire car to swerve violently. Her plan worked. They lost the first two cars, but not the last two. Izumi put her foot all the way down on the gas while staying straight. There was an outcry over the radio from the other SUVs. They were talking to one another. We didn't know. We thought she had returned. It's a protocol to check. I work with idiots. Don't worry. We're still on them. I'm still inside the truck. Izumi let out a gasp at that as she looked towards the radio. Of course, someone would be in the truck. God, she felt like an idiot. But she didn't have time to think. Her main objective was still clear in her mind. Shake the last two cars off of them, and that's just what she's going to do. None of you are to move. Do you understand me? The HPSC representative told everyone inside the truck sternly. This has to be the League's doing, but fear not. You will be going to our headquarters for questioning, she told all of the people inside the truck. Deku shook his head and groaned a little. He had smacked his head on the side of the truck when it had taken such a sharp turn it made him see stars for a moment, but outside of a throbbing headache, he was fine, for now. Izuku was sitting next to Deku, his head down, eyes closed as he looked sick. He was fiddling with the cuffs on his wrists, making them jingle softly as he did this. Ochako was on Izuku's right and she looked straight ahead, lost in the thought. Determination laced in her face. Let the League try, she whispered before looking at Deku. Let them try. Oh man, oh man, oh man, Kaminari whispered nervously as he rocketed his leg up and down frantically. He was sitting next to who else? Izumi just sent him dirty looks and tried to sit as close to the wall as possible. She had curled up on herself to make herself as small as possible. This is bad. Minta was sitting between Vet and Hitomi. He looked nervous, and funny enough Hitomi didn't. If anything, she looked at ease for the first time since she was found. You can hold my hand if you're scared, she told a shaking Minta. Minta would in fact take her hand. I think we're going to be just fine. Moss was sitting in Hitoshi's lap. Not beside him, but in his lap. Hitoshi didn't seem to mind, but, like the others, he looked uneasy. The League, he gently scratched Moss's chin and Moss gave a purr at this. Mina leaned against Hitoshi, and Hitoshi didn't mind as he let her hear. They all were. Were they about to stare death in the face? Were they going to be thrown off of a cliff? Who knew? There was a sigh next to him as Izuku sat up a little straighter. Why is Vet allowed to keep his gun? He asked, but he never opened his eyes. Instead, he leaned against his legs, slouching. Excuse me, the woman inquired. Why is Vet allowed his gun? I figured that'd be one of the first things you'd take, seeing how it's a weapon. It's a tranquilizer, Vet commented. Still a gun, one that looks like a rifle. Truth be told, the woman started, but Izuku cut her off. You didn't ask about anything, not our quirks, not our backstories, nothing. You just herded us like cattle into this van without knowing a damn thing about us. Because we'll know later at the headquarters. Once we get control over the van again. I don't like your tone, she hissed towards him, and Izuku smirked slowly before he leaned up and slapped his legs. Well, you should have asked. You would have known who my father is. Not all for one, my adoptive father, and you would have known. Izuku then stood fully and let his hands drop open. The quirk-suppressant cuffs fell from his wrists and clattered onto the floor. That I should have been put in something a little difficult to get out of. The woman stood now, uneasy. Izuku. Actually, Izuku laughed as he raked his fingers through his hair before he opened his red eyes. It's Kyujo, Kyujo said with a grin as his hair started to turn white and straight. And we've made our stance clear. We're not going back to you guys. Stand down, the woman hissed. Kyujo, Deku whispered, and Kyujo looked back at him. There were several seconds of silence as they just stared at one another. Izuku saw it. A pained look in Kyujo's eyes as he was pleading with Deku. Deku looked away silently. It was at this did the others also went silent. We're not going, I'm telling you now. It's not happening because of those people who have hijacked this van. They're not the League. You can't know that. The woman now started to pace, and Kyujo got low. Like an animal ready to pounce, he kept his fingers just grazing the ground as he kept his posture low into the ground. Kyujo grinned. But I was able to sense their quirks. Don't forget, I also have all for one. I'm sure that's why Miss Hitomi over there has been happy ever since the woman came over the loudspeaker. That's your mother, isn't it? Kyujo inquired as he turned towards Hitomi. Yep, she's found me. They want us away from you, and I don't blame them. You're right. I was put into one of your facilities because I got a little too violent. I know what you're all capable of. Kyujo yelled as he kept himself poised, ready to attack. This isn't just questioning. I know it's not. You don't know anything. When we met, you said, and I quote, into one of our facilities. I know enough by that alone. You plan on torturing us for information, don't you? The lady gave a laugh. It sounded fake and meant to sound like indignance. No. You're a terrible liar. Kyujo put his hand on Hitoshi's knee without breaking eye contact with the woman, and Hitoshi's eyes went wide. Why? Hitoshi tried to say, but Kyujo shut him off. Are you aware that we don't know anything? If you really wanted to protect us, you would have left us at UA. We just. The woman's eyes went blank and her jaw slack. Are you planning on torturing us? Kyujo inquired now that the woman was under brainwashing. The woman couldn't fight it. Kyujo was too strong. If you don't comply. Yes, the woman spoke in monotone, and Kyujo smirked. He then grabbed her by her throat and pushed her into the doors. Whoa, Kyujo, Deku yelled as he stood. Kyujo looked behind at Deku and only gave him a little smile. I'm not going to hurt her, he reassured Deku. But then he slammed the back of the woman's head into the doors with enough force to knock her out. I am knocking her ass out. I knew the HPSC was up to no good. Dude, Kaminari gasped at him as they all stared at the lady knocked unconscious. I did us all a favor, Kyujo said almost definitely as he turned towards the woman and started to loot through her pockets. Yeah, sure, knock the beach out. Might as well loot her for all she's worth, Izumi grumbled tiredly, and Kyujo just rolled his eyes. After a bit of patting, he found what he was looking for, the key to the cuffs, and he turned towards the others. Now, anybody else want to say something? Kyujo inquired, and Hitoshi only raised his hand. Can I have my quirk back? Right, sorry, Tasha-chan, I just needed to be sure my suspicions were corrected. A red mist flew around both Kyujo and Hitoshi before Hitoshi was given back his quirk. And if you were wrong? Ochako demanded with a gasp. What then? And Kyujo only gave her a weak shrug in response. Who knows? It doesn't matter. All that matters is that I'm right. They were going to torture us. They were going to torture you, simply because you were in the same room as us, and you. He pointed at Hitoshi, Kaminari, Minta, and Mina in that order as he said, and the girls. Say what you want about me. I don't care. But as it stands, I'm not afraid to get the job done. Neither is Izuku. And just where is Izuku? That inquired softly. He's been rather quiet. I'm here, Izuku waved as Kyujo's eyes went from green to red. I was watching, making sure Kyujo didn't go mental. Oh, well, alright then. Vet went quiet while Kyujo started to unlock the cuffs. He started with Deku. It was as he was unlocking the cuffs did the truck serve and sent Kyujo flying back into Denki. Denki did manage to grab Kyujo, but it was a little awkward with the cuffs. Thanks, Kyujo started to say, but was cut off by the radio clicking to life once more. Hello, all my gals, bros, and non-binary hoes. This is Athos speaking, not your driver by the way. Requesting that you all please sit down and buckle up if you happen to have seatbelts, because the HPSC are currently trying to run us off the road. I repeat, the HPSC are all currently trying to run us off of the road. If you don't have seatbelts, then may God have mercy on your soul. ATHOS, came the shrill and horrified cry of who could only be presumed as Hitomi's mother. Izumi Shinsu. There was an audible struggle and the van swerved before straightening up. Give me that, came the familiar voice of Kakin. Deku gasped in shock. Buckle your fucking seatbelts. Kakin, my daughter is in there. Then it's time for her to learn some new vocabulary. Hitomi giggled as she leaned in close to Minta. Mommy doesn't know, but Uncle Kakin already taught me that word. Athos was whooping and hollering as Izumi was whipping down the street at speeds she'd never dreamt of using. She weaved in and out of traffic with the two HPSC vehicles following her every movement, the one trying to run her off of the road keeping to her side and up with her speed. The only thing stopping it from trying to run her off now was that she managed to weave into the middle lane, and now the car couldn't push her off without endangering civilians going down the highway. Izumi knew that the person in the car was just biding his time until either they got enough room to ram them again or they're trying to box us in, Izumi said almost calmly as she watched the second car move into the lane next to them. It was like a light bulb went off above her head as she watched this. She tightened her grip on the wheel and looked at the speedometer. We're going over 100 miles per hour. She narrowed her eyes and then looked at Athos and Bakugo, who were still fighting over the receiver, and she reached over and patted Bakugo. You two, brace yourselves. Make sure your seat belts are on properly. What are you going to do? Athos inquired as he made sure his seatbelt was on as it should be, and Bakugo didn't need to be told twice. Something crazy. Just try me, and don't freak, she ordered right as she did. The car on her left made contact with the side of the truck, and the car on her left made contact, causing the truck to jolt a little. Izumi grabbed the receiver and clicked it on for just a moment. Everybody hang on, she ordered, and checked her mirrors. Nobody was coming from behind that she could see. She put the receiver in its cradle and swallowed hard. Izumi then stomped on the brakes. There was a horrific scratching sound of metal on metal as both cars scraped the sides of the van. The tires squealed at the sudden stop, and Izumi quickly put it in reverse. Both cars rocketed past her before their own brakes squealed loudly and their rear lights turned on. Izumi twisted the truck as quickly as she could, and soon she was going forward again, only this time down the wrong side of the highway. Cars honked when she passed them at lightning speeds. Oh my God. Athos let out a sound between a laugh and a scream as he grabbed onto his seatbelt for dear life. Bakugo was white-knuckling the handbar above his head so badly that Izumi was afraid he was going to break it. Cars continued to honk as Izumi weaved in and out of traffic as fast as the truck would allow her. The highway was separated by sides, and Izumi kept her eyes on the median between each side. She just needed one opening, just one that'll allow her to cross over to the right side of the road before the other cars catch up to them. Izumi continued to expertly loom in and out of traffic while constantly looking over to the other side for an opening that cops use. Well, thank God for Athos there, Athos yelled as he pointed ahead. There in the median was an opening with a no U-turn sign. Hang on. Izumi knew this turn was going to be sharp. She couldn't slow down. If she slowed down, the other cars could catch up to them. So Izumi braced herself, and so did the others. Knowing that she couldn't slow down, she whipped the truck into the space. The truck actually lifted off of two tires at such a turn, and for just a second Izumi swore she could hear the screams coming from inside the truck. Athos smashed into Bakugo and wrapped his arms around the blonde as Bakugo slammed against the window with a grunt. For just a moment they felt weightless, and Izumi prayed the truck wouldn't flip over. It didn't. It corrected itself, and she whipped right to the right side of the highway. She let out a wheeze. Izumi swore she was going to have a heart attack then and there. She couldn't stop though, not until she knew they were safe and away from the HPSC. Funny enough, Athos stayed attached to Bakugo for a second longer than he should have. Nice, Athos said as he squeezed one of Bakugo's pecs. Slap. What is wrong with you? Bakugo yelled in disgust as he put his arms over his chest. Athos now had a nice new handprint on his face as he hung his head. Izumi reached over and gave Athos her own slap. It wasn't nearly as hard as Bakugo's, but still enough to get Athos to whine. Don't grope people, male or female, she chastised Athos while focusing on the road. The last thing I need is another Minta. Okay, sorry, Athos gasped. Izumi looked behind her and saw that while they were a good distance away, the cars were still on the prowl, and Izumi did a sweep around. If I can get to that exit. This is your final warning. The president has been notified of this, and if you do not comply, you and everyone else in that truck will be labeled as villains and will be wanted for a series of crimes. Do you want that? Izumi grabbed the receiver of the radio and spoke clearly into it. Let me make one thing clear. We are not villains. We are all trying to do the right thing, and being with you in your clutches is not the right thing. I would rather die than give you my daughter. I've spent the last 13 years making sure you stay away from her in my world, and I sure as hell am not doing it now. Izumi all but screamed in the receiver before she finally unhooked it and focused back on the road. Izumi whipped up to the exit she saw before and twisted into a new road, cutting someone off and earning a honk of protest. Izumi then saw her chance. She veered off onto a street, then another street. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't care. She just wanted these people off of her scent. Izumi allowed herself to slow down when she didn't see the cars following any longer. Finally, she pulled off into an abandoned parking lot and relaxed against the seat with a gasp. Oh my God, I never want to do something like that again. She breathed heavily as she put her hands into her hair. Come on, we can't stay here for long, she said, and then immediately opened her door and hopped out. Let's get the others in some disguises. Kaminari was unconscious. Minda was also unconscious, as was Vet. The three of them either passed out from stress-induced fear. Izuku was sure he saw Vet's soul leave his body at one point, or in Kaminari's case, they flew across the back of the armored truck and smacked their head against the wall. Poor thing. There was silence as everyone got their bearings about them, a tangle of limbs on the floor as the truck did not have seatbelts. Izuku was sure if it wasn't for super regeneration he probably would have had a broken bone or two. Everyone alive? Deku inquired as he stood and rubbed his head, wincing as he did so. I think, Izumi whispered as she wiped the BLD away from her nose. She either collided with the floor or with someone else, judging by the fact that Minta was also rubbing his BLDY nose. Izuku would have to say the latter. I cannot believe that happened. Ochako winced as she stood. I think I twisted something, she said softly, and Deku was quick. He hopped up and grabbed her, gently carrying her bridal style. There we go, better? He inquired in a soft voice, and she, while blushing, nodded as she held on to him. No fair. Mina whined. I twisted something too. Did you really? Izuku inquired, and she did nod before showing her right ankle that was swollen. If not twisted, then I for sure rolled it. Oh. She gasped when Izuku picked her up with ease. That her? He asked her with a smile, and she nodded. Thank you, Deku. Izuku, he corrected her. She nodded again. Hitomi crouched next to Hitoshi, who was wincing while gently massaging his wrist. You okay, Dad? I'm not your dad, Squirt, he reminded her as he slowly started to stand. Fine. I think I sprained my wrist with that last fall. Hitomi blinked as she watched him. She then smiled before she grabbed his wrist and kissed it gently, like a little child, which she knew he wasn't her actual dad. But that wasn't going to stop her from making him feel better if she could. God, stop that smile, Hitoshi laughed as he flicked her nose. You look too much like Midoriya. That only made Hitomi smile more. Then, it was like seeing the first ray of sun in the early morning hours as there was a click and the heavy doors opened, the light spilled through and everyone winced at the sudden brightness. Okay. Who's not dead? Came the excited shout that sounded a lot like Izuku. A boy dressed in a hoodie, goggles, and a mask sat on the edge of the truck. Let me guess, you're Izuku Midoriya? Deku inquired. You can call me Athos. Athos made a dramatic pose by lifting his arm in the air and he crossed one knee over the other. Nerd. Bakugo slammed both hands on the bottom of the truck as he yelled loudly. Just what do you think you're doing running off without me? Huh? He demanded. I wasn't running off. Kaken. Deku jumped down from the truck with Ochako still in his arms. I was kind of taken against my will, so to speak. God, stop yelling. Izuku grunted as he jumped next. This made Bakugo snort at him. I already have a headache. Hitoshi was led to the edge by Hitomi. Moss, being up and alert, was resting on his shoulder like a parrot. All right now. Why? His voice got caught in his throat when Mrs. Shinsu made herself known. The fully grown woman turned towards him and opened her arms. Honestly, if it wasn't for Hitomi running to her mother, Hitoshi may have just returned that hug. Oh, baby. Izumi Shinsu cooed as she hugged her daughter from side to side before peppering her child with kisses. I was so worried. I was so. Then in a 180, Mrs. Shinsu grabbed her daughter's ear, harshly. Worried? I told you not to leave the car. She scolded her daughter. Muum. Hitomi whined. You needed help. Hitomi yelled in her defense, and Mrs. Shinsu let her daughter's ear go with a sigh. I forget you're my daughter as well as Hitoshi's. Mrs. Shinsu sighed as she stood. So, who have we here? She inquired in a soft tone. I see. Ochako, Ashido, Denki, and Minru, so no need to introduce yourselves. I'm aware of who you are. Of course. She gestured towards Hitoshi. I know who you are, she said with a smile as she twisted her wedding ring. Deku raised his hand. Deku, also known as Izuku Midoriya. This is, well, it's my universe. Do you also have our quirk? One for all. Bakugo nudged Deku, and Deku shook his head. I already said it in front of them during All for One's speech. I do, Izumi told him with a firm nod. Izuku raised his hand, then his eyes flashed red. Kyujo. I have red eyes. Wehi. Kyujo is a sentient quirk with one for all and all for one. He gave her the basic rundown, and Mrs. Shinsu did have a slight frown on her face, but she accepted this with a nod. I trusted he's on our side. Yes, ma'am. Ma'am. God, have I gotten that old? She asked with a laugh. I'm Moss. The cat spoke from Hitoshi's shoulder, and Mrs. Shinsu first nodded before her eyes opened and she twisted her head around to look at Moss. Okay was all she could say. We have Vet here too. He's also Izuku Midoriya, but we have taken to calling him Vet, but he's still knocked out. He's a healer, but he can also kill things with his quirk. Deku filled Mrs. Shinsu in as he, with the help of Izuku, pulled Vet out of the truck. Mrs. Shinsu only gave another nod as she was given a basic rundown. She'd have to ask Vet about it later. Her eyes went to the female Izuku who had come out last and was leaning against the back of the truck looking rather tired. Her clothes were clearly one of the boys as they hung off of her body. Even with a belt, she was pulling the pants up constantly. Mrs. Shinsu smiled as she approached the girl. Now, who have we here? She inquired as she leaned down and gently pinched the girl's cheek. The girl looked a little shocked, no doubt seeing her own older face staring back at her. I'm Izumi Midori. Ah, so am I, Mrs. Shinsu said with a smile. I guess this means I'm gonna need a nickname. Mrs. Shinsu stood as she thought about it. I can't go by Deku. That's already taken. Can't go by Shinsu. That's also taken and confusing. She scratched her head as she thought about it. Finally, she shrugged. Call me Athena. I guess a bat was shoved into her stomach, not hard, but enough to get her attention. Don't you steal from me, Athos hissed as he shoved the bat against her stomach again. Not stealing. Athena is a god, and Athos is just a name derived from Athena. Athos didn't look too impressed, but he backed down with a hand wave. Whatever, stop stealing, you old bat. Athena shook her head before she looked at the others. Come on, let's take a look around and find somewhere to lay low. She stopped when she noticed one final person knocked unconscious, the HPSC lady. I'll just keep her in the truck with the doors open, Athena whispered while she kept the truck doors open. At this point, Vet was starting to wake. Along with Denki and Minda, Vet let out a startled gasp when Athena bent down to greet him. Nice to meet you. She extended her hand and he took her. She helped him to his feet. Finally, they felt complete. Their little ragtag group was complete to its fullest. Maybe they had a shot at going head to head with All for One, but not now, not until way later, hopefully. It was thanks to Athos they found a place to stay low. It was an abandoned motel of all things. The motel was far enough away from the van and was in the slums of Musutafu, so there's no way the HPSC would be looking for them around these parts. How'd you know this was here? Vet inquired as Athos walked into one of the unlocked rooms that still had a bed, a dirt, a musty water stain. They prayed bed with no pillows, sheets, or covers. Athos practically skipped to the bed and laid down. Stretching himself out like he was at home, he threw his arms behind his head and gave a happy hum. Deku's universe is very close to mine. I noticed, very close, so I took a shot in the dark and here it is. Athos lowered his mask, hood, and took his red-tinted goggles off and let them rest over his head. Wow, you two look so much alike, Ochako commented as Deku gently placed her on the ground. I mean, we all look alike, Izuku told her as he put Mina next to her. Yeah, but like we can tell the difference between you, Deku, and Vet. Athos is the only one that looks the most like Deku. Athos kept the smile before he turned it into a toothy grin, showing that he was missing a front tooth. You sure about that? Oh, Ochako blinked in surprise. Izumi walked in with Athena carrying the still knocked unconscious Kaminari. Athena walked over to Athos and tapped his leg. Move, Kaminari is still unconscious. Athos snorted and rolled off the bed with an eye roll so Athena could put Kaminari down. How'd you lose that tooth? Izuku asked as he tilted Athos's head up to inspect the missing tooth for himself. But Athos waved him off. Lost it fighting some random Yakuza goon. The guy knocked me silly. Oh, all right then. There was a sudden mew as Moss rubbed himself against Hitoshi's face, not once leaving Hitoshi's shoulder. Dude, seriously, why are you so needy? Hitoshi gave a grumble as he picked Moss up by his underarms and held the cat up at arm's length. Moss's ears gave a twitch as he just continued to look at Hitoshi with big eyes. Hitoshi was weak. You're lucky you're cute, he grumbled while he put Moss back on his shoulder. Everyone else piled in and Vet took note of injuries. Okay, he whispered while he got started with Ochako. What are you? Ochako gave a soft noise when Vet crouched down and gently touched her bad ankle. Deku grabbed her shoulders. It's okay, Ochako. He's a healer, Deku reassured her while pulling her in a tad that got the others' attention. Those who haven't seen Vet in action all turned minus Kaminari and leaned in to get a better look. Even Athena was sitting on the bed to get a look. Hitomi rushed to her mother. And despite Hitomi's age and size, Izumi didn't hesitate to let her daughter sit in her lap when Hitomi clambered on. Ochako did relax at Deku's reassurance. Vet was careful as his cold fingers gently touched around her ankle. She gave a sharp hiss when he touched where her ankle hurt the most and Vet nodded. You most definitely twisted it. Vet was quick to shed tranquilizer off of his back so he could lean down a bit more easily. Athos happily took the gun from Vet. Athos wasted no time examining the gun. The barrel was long and thin to show its difference from other guns. It wasn't all that heavy and even had a wood finishing on the butt like a normal rifle may have. Vet aimed it and stared down its sights. He popped the gun open and pulled out the tranquilizer. It was just a little dart with pink feathering. Athos held it up to inspect the dart. So, what's in this? Athos inquired while he twisted the dart in his hand. Horse tranquilizer, Vet responded as he placed both of his hands on Ochako's ankle. His hands started glow golden and the golden light wrapped around Ochako's injury, and only seconds later she let out a sigh of relief as the pressure and pain receded. Wow, Ochako gasped as she lifted her leg in the air and gently circled her ankle to test it out. That's such a powerful quirk. You could be the next recovery girl. Ochako then gasped and put her hands to her cheeks. Are you in your world? Vet just shook his head. I'm a veterinarian, remember? Ochako blushed as she rubbed the back of her head with an awkward laugh. Right, sorry. No need to apologize. Vet then turned to Mina and started to do the same thing to her ankle. So why exactly do you just happen to have a horse trank with you? Athos asked as Vet started to heal Mina's own injured ankle, the same he had with Ochako. I was on my farm when I was sucked and I always keep tranquilizers with me during the winter season, not for my horses, but to stop any coyotes from attacking. I usually use a small dose for the coyote. A full dose would be enough to knock out All Might, Vet explained as he stood and then accepted Mina's hug of thankfulness. Vet saw it, a glimmer suddenly lighting behind Athena's eyes as she quickly reached over and took the tranquilizer from Athos. Athena held the tranquilizer up to her eyes to inspect it from its point to its feather. Vet then approached Kaminari and gently touched the blonde's head. Bakugo was staring over Vet's shoulder as he worked to heal any unseen injury. Can you heal the dead? It was such a dark question that it made everyone turn to look at Kyujo. His hair was still green, But his eyes were red. This told them that Izuku was still in control and that Kyujo was merely speaking. Dude, mind to whispered as me an uneasy face. Kyujo paid him no mind. No, vet answered without a fuss. They're dead. There's nothing I can do once they cross that line. Trust me, I tried. He whispered the last part in English as he pulled away from Kaminari once the boy was healed. Kyujo only hummed and then retreated away to allow Izuku full control again. You know, I've been meaning to ask, isn't it annoying to have to flicker back and forth? Vet inquired, making Izuku look at him with a raised eyebrow. No, I mean, at first it kind of was because I originally wanted nothing to do with Kyujo. But over time Izuku then just shrugged. It's easier to flicker back and forth so the other can talk without one of us having to say hey. Kyujo said, you know. Izuku inquired, and Vet could only shrug the same as Izuku just had. I guess. Then again, it is your quirk and you know how to us it. Izuku put his finger to his lips to silence Vet. Kyujo is not an it or a thing. Kyujo is, well, he's Kyujo. Vet thought about it for a moment before he nodded. Apologies, I was just trying to say. You both know how to make the best of your situation. Oh, Vet looked at his gloved hands. If only I could. As powerful as my quirk is, it's just as deadly, and that scares me. How bad does it get? I mean, Ochako piped in, and she looked at Mina and Hitoshi before looking back at Vet. We saw the blackness creeping up your arms and how you put yourself away from everyone. Also heard your story. But how bad? When my quirk first awakened, I killed an entire forest. I made the trees all die around me. Even to this day, 5 years later in my universe, the trees have been torn down and the grass is still dead. So when the blackness starts to grow, I make it a point to stay from people and demand they stay away from me, as even though I didn't heal you, I can still kill you. Kyujo was back as he gently touched Vet's hand. It was surprisingly tender for Kyujo. If you ever want, we could take your quirk to see how it works, not forever, but to get a feel and see just what's going on with it. Vet shook his head as he took his hand back. No thanks. Well, I have no doubt that you are in fact powerful. The last thing we need is you to make my quirk even more powerful. Kyujo smirked at this as he put his hands on hips. You know, he has a point. Kyujo, Deku hummed, out of all of us you're the most powerful, but that's because you make any quirk you have powerful. If you get your hands on Vet's quirk, you could potentially kill an entire city. Not that you would, of course. It's more than that. Izuku came back as he shut his eyes. You see, when either I or Kyujo take a quirk, depending on the quirk, my body may not handle it. My body has to get used to a quirk, and not only that, but overusing all for one, it gives me a horrid fever and makes me sick for days. I think the longest I had a fever was 4 days, so Vet's quirk could literally kill me if we take it. Fair enough, I suppose, but we have super regeneration. And that's helped keep the fever at bay and helped with any side effects you'd have. When we took Toshichan's quirk earlier, for example, usually you'd be on the floor bleeding out your nose or seizing. Don't remind me still. It's not worth it, Kyujo. Super regeneration. Now, I'm curious, Izumi hummed as she pulled her pants up as they started to slip again. Yeah, how many quirks do you have that aren't yours anyways? And more importantly, why do you have them? Athena inquired next. Not in a harsh or even demanding tone, but in a curious one. Izuku chewed on his lip. We have super regeneration because we took it from the doctor working for our father. The doctor responsible for creating Namus. It's come in handy, to say the least. Next we have, well, Izuku sighed and rubbed at his face. He then extended his hand out towards Athena, and suddenly the dart in her hand was yanked out and landed in Izuku's hand. Oh, Hitomi clapped. You have telekinesis. Like me. Well, yes, and no, you got telekinesis passed down through genetics. This is Inko Midoriya's quirk because of Kyujo, and another factor, it's stronger and we can only bring things to us or stop the projection. We can't push objections back or anything like that. As for the question as to what was given to us, she wanted me to have it. You see, for 8 years she thought I was dead when I was kidnapped. I was thought as quirkless, and the hero assigned to my case just said I was dead. Nobody looked. Nobody bothered. So when I suddenly took her quirk on accident, she realized I was still alive. She told me she wanted me to have it, so she'll know I'm alive. Izuku explained to them all. 8 years of thinking your child was dead. Moss shook his head. I can't imagine. Yeah, it was a shock to me too when she showed up at UA. It was Bakugo that had informed her that I was alive at the time. Izuku shook his head regardless. No. Izuku went quiet at Kyujo's voice in his head and he licked his lips. Kyujo. No, don't tell them about. They're already on edge around me. If they learn that we have overhaul and how we got it, they'll want nothing to do with us. Izuku hated to say it, but Kyujo had a point. But I won't tell them the whole truth, he promised. Kyujo, I know a few of them had faced against overhaul. They had to, right? Maybe they'll understand. I don't know. Just let me talk then. Sorry, he apologized. When he came back to the others, Kyujo just had a concern. We have one final quirk, one I'm sure a few of you already familiar with, overhaul. Yep, several of them sat up stiffer at this. Bakugo narrowed his eyes. Ochako did the same. But they didn't speak. Vet sat up straight at this and just watched Izuku with a seriousness Izuku didn't know he had. Nobody spoke. They wanted Izuku to speak for himself. He had been living on the streets for over a month. Our father Aizawa found her eating out of trash cans. Kyujo convinced her that they were siblings, and she stayed with present Mike for a while. Well, as it turns out, overhaul had someone staking out the place for a while to try and find her one day. Overhaul just walks in. His Yakuza had distracted our father and present Mike and got them away from the house. Overhaul demanded Eri. And our caseworker, who was also there at the time, stepped between Overhaul and Eri. It didn't end well. Kyujo can impale people to take their quirks. I never found the joy in it. But that's beside the point. Kyujo took Overhaul, and while there wasn't much the man could do after that, Izuku sighed and licked his lips. He was arrested, and with Overhaul we brought our caseworker back. He shrugged. We've just sort of kept the quirk ever since. You know. We weren't going to give it back to him. We don't use it. We found it better not to. Some relaxed at this. Others still looked wary. Izuku happened to look over at Vet and Athena. While Vet seemed satisfied with this, Athena did not. If anything, her eyes narrowed when they made eye contact with one another. Izuku quickly looked away and scratched his neck. But yeah, those are all the quirks we have that aren't ours. Well, the subject would drop and people would break off to talk to one another. Kaminari would eventually wake with a gasp. I dreamt I was in a car and we nearly died. He reached for the first person with green hair without thinking about it and wrapped his arms around them in a hug. Oh my. Athena gave a startled gasp before turning. Athena looked at him and smiled. Kaminari looked like all of his dreams came through at that moment as his cheeks flushed pink. You are absolutely stunning. Don't throat punch me. Athena put her hand up to her mouth in a giggle. Now, why would I do that? She inquired while tilting her head, and Kaminari could have died at that moment and be okay with it. Bonk. Oh, Kaminari hissed when a bat lightly knocked into his skull. Well, hard enough to hurt, but light enough that he didn't need a second appointment with Vet. He rubbed the sore spot and looked at a new Izuku. Midoriya. Be thirsty elsewhere, Athos demanded before he lightly tapped Kaminari with his bat once more. Bonk. Oh, stop that. Hitomi giggled a little at this. Minta came up to her and let out a groan like he was in pain. No fair. He gets to hug her. Minta whined, and Hitomi tilted her head at this reaction. Minta looked at Hitomi and read her confused reaction. I can't expect you to understand, but your mother. A total MILF. A what? Hitomi inquired. She have her mother been called lots of things. Most good, a few bad, but never that. Minta snorted. Urethroteen? You should know what a MILF is. What is that? Wow, okay, a MILF stands for. It was like a cold wind swept through the whole motel room as Minta could feel it. Athena was directly behind him now and squatted down because he could feel her breath against his ear. Finish that sentence and you'll be eating your next meal through a straw. Minta. Athena's voice was just as cold as the air had become. It was murderous. Minta could feel her sharp gaze as Black Whip creeped just along the edge of his vision, daring him to complete the sentence. Nothing, Minta wisely chosen to say as he gave a fake and forced laugh. It's nothing. I don't know what I'm saying. Then it was like nothing happened as Athena promptly stood and clapped her hands together happily. Good. She then pushed Minta away from Hitomi and hugged her daughter. Now that it seems that everyone is healed, we should really come up with a game plan, she continued to say while choosing to ignore everyone's disturbed faces at what they just witnessed. Even Izumi looked freaked out, but she was also intrigued. She got Minta to back off so easily. She was terrifying, but there was something more to it. There was an air of confidence about her as well. She didn't put up with their shit at all. Moss merely blinked as he looked up at Hitoshi's blushing face. He was tempted to press the translator button on his collar but decided he didn't want to know in all actuality. Holy shit, Kaminari whispered, and Minta groaned from his spot on the floor. She's terrifying. Minta's muffled voice. That's look akin to hot, Hitoshi added, ignoring the looks the others were currently giving him. Dude, you're already her husband in another universe. Don't make it weird, Kaminari told him. Oh, I'm the one making it weird. Yeah, kinda. Hitoshi just waved Kaminari off. Well, we should talk about talk about a game plan because he's coming after us, all of us. Unfortunately, Deku responded to Athena. We also need to figure out what we're going to do about the HPSC. Athena gave a nod as did the others agreed. As it stands, our biggest issue is them. At the moment, not all for one. Izumi crossed her arms over her chest as she sat down on the bed. When Kaminari looked at her, she made it a point to scooch away from him. Something I want to do. Athena sat between Kaminari and Izumi. Creating a barrier between the two of them is get more tranquilizer. Athena then tossed the dart to Vet, who caught it with ease. Do you think you could get more? If they sell my brand. For sure, but now I'm curious. Vet gave her a little of a sleek smile and Athena leaned back on her arms. Think of it as a fail-safe while we don't have a solid plan just yet. If we should get ambushed, then we have a backup. Athena explained. You a good shot? Vet shrugged. Not the worst shot. If that's what you're asking, I've knocked out my fair share of Sciots. Athena thought about it. We need disguises if we want to go into town. No doubt our faces are already plastered everywhere. She started to pace around while muttering to herself, her mouth moving a mile a minute. What do we need to get in town? Izumi inquired, and this made Athena look at her. Well, outside of the tranquilizers, food, bedding, and to scope around in general, look for a better place to sleep than this roach-infested place. Hey, this was my home for 3 months. Athos protested, and that made everyone look at him. Athos then turned away. Not that that mattered. The bed bugs were horrible. Bakugo rolled his eyes. I'll go. They weren't aware I was in the car with you, and even if they were, I don't think they could prove it was me by voice alone. I can't guarantee horse tranquilizers. No, Athena turned and opened one of her pocket. Don't worry about the tranquilizers right now. Get us some hats, bandanas, and sunglasses if you can. Athena then handed Bakugo a small bit of cash. Bakugo whistled. You think that'll do it? Ball caps, bandanas, and sunglasses? Don't you think we'd need more than that? I don't doubt we do. I mean, several of you are still in the UA uniform, Athos and I stick out like sore thumbs wearing all black in the day. And don't get me started on poor Izumi over there. We all need new clothes, but we can't all go out at once. We can give him our sizes. Izumi shuggested from her spot on the floor. Let him pick out clothes for us. There were a few mumbles as some sounded unsure, which made Bakugo snort. What? You think I don't have a fashion sense? I'm better than Deku over there. He gestured towards Deku as he yelled this. It's not that. That'll take you forever to buy new clothes for 11 of us, and that's counting yourself and not Moss, Deku told him. It was then did Izuku snap his fingers. Hoodies. Like Athos, just get 11 hoodies. It'll be enough to cover our shirts, and who cares about our pants? I say skip the ball caps because they're hoodies. You don't need to buy me a bandana. For what it's worth, Vet added as he moved his green bandana over his face. And you don't have to buy me a hoodie, Athos said while he dangled upside on the bed once more. No, you are absolutely getting a new hoodie, Athos. Athena told him sternly. That one will give you away with its dye job. Hey, you think it's dye? Cute. Athos only grinned at her. I'm playing, Granny. Athena only rolled her eyes. Is everyone okay with wearing a hoodie until we get proper disguises? She inquired, and everyone nodded. Athena then reached into her pouch again and pulled out more money. Here, that should be more than enough. God damn, Kaminari gasped. How loaded are you? Athena only gave him a little smile before winking at him. Being number one in my world has its perks, though it is strange. She put her hands on her hips and Bakugo snorted. It is strange that you're number one. That's my spot. Not that, Kakin. It's well, let me show you guys. She reached into another pouch hanging off of her leg and pulled her phone out. I'm sure I'm the only one with their phone on them at this moment. Yeah. The others nodded. I left mine plugged into the wall. Vet sighed. I had just plugged mine, and Izuku shook his head. Izumi had to think about it. She scratched her head and nodded. I put mine on my nightstand. I'm a cat, so I don't have a phone. Moss could only shrug and then shake his head. Deku leaned against the wall. It's in my dorm. I plugged it in last night after we had caught Izuku, but clearly I forgot about it. All of ours, Mina sighed. Denki finished for her with his own sigh. Are in our bags. Mr. Aizawa is crystal clear on phone usage during school hours. Achako only nodded. Yeah. Well, check this out. Athena popped her battery back into her phone and showed it to all of them. Her phone immediately started glitching, the screen not holding still long enough for her to do anything. At first I thought it was because I was blasted back into the past, and in a way I was. But I realized that's not the case. It's because I'm not in my world yet. She pulled out a credit card from the same pouch. She had her phone, and this works just fine. Achako blinked. Are you sure you're not taking from someone? I pray I'm not. Athena cut her off. You know Moss. Mina turned towards the cat in question, and Moss perked his ears up. Your translator? Maybe that shouldn't work either. Moss reached up and turned his translator on. I'm glad it does work. Otherwise I think Aizawa was planning on catnapping me. Otherwise you do have a good point. However, it's weird that only her phone was affected. Yeah, no kidding, Athena huffed as she put her phone back in her pocket. I would ask you guys if you're experiencing the same thing, but clearly. Bakugo stepped up to her. So, hoodies, bandanas, and sunglasses? He inquired, and Athena nodded. Please, just so we can get out of here and find somewhere else. Bakugo nodded. I'll be back. Then see you guys in a bit. There was an immediate chorus as everyone shouted the exact same thing. Stay safe. Their little group broke off with everyone making small talk with everyone else. They were game planning, and Athena couldn't blame them. Athena sighed as she twisted her wedding ring and looked down at it. Has he been notified? He's probably beside himself with worry. No doubt. Don't worry, Hitoshi, we're coming home hopefully sooner rather than later. Hopefully. Bakugo returned nearly 40 minutes later with a bunch of different hoodies, all the same size. Adult 2XL, which was a smart move. He also had bandanas and sunglasses. He even returned Athena's change with a huff. The truck stopped selling these, had the news station on. Your faces are plastered everywhere, so we really have to keep a low profile. Athena nodded as she helped pass out the hoodies and bandanas. Thank you, Kakin. It's as I figured. I wish I could say this was my first run-in with the police. Same, came the response from Deku, Izuku, and Athos. Izumi just looked at them with a dumbfounded look while Moss gave a snort from Hitoshi's shoulder. Athena also snorted at this, but it was more of fondness than anything. I see most of us had our fair share of run-ins with the law, she said, and the others nodded still. The subject was pretty quickly dropped as everyone just wanted to get ready and get out of there before they contracted some unknown sickness from this rundown motel. It didn't matter what colors they wore. All that mattered in the end was that their faces were hidden by sunglasses or bandanas or both. Dude, came Kaminari's concerned voice that made the others turn. Athos was in the process of removing his dyed dingy, and torn hoodie for a new Hawks-themed hoodie with red wings on the back. Well, what Athos didn't have was a shirt under that hoodie. Athos had abs, but he also had scars, at least 10 from what Izumi could see, all in varying shapes and sizes. It looked like he had been stabbed many times, once on his chest, once on his side, another on his other side, and so on. Been into your fair share of battles, have you? Athena inquired when Athos got the large hoodie over his body. Haven't you? Athos countered back as he grabbed his bat and a rope to tie the bat to his back. He then started to remove his trusty weapons from his other hoodie. I saw that scar on your arm and your right hand. Both of you, if I'm being honest. He pointed at Athena and then at Deku. Mama has lots of scars, Hitomi said as she put on an oversized black hoodie. This hoodie completely dwarfed her, and the sleeves went a good 5 inches past her arms, and the hoodie itself could be a dress, which was impressive as Hitomi was pretty tall for a child her age. Sunglasses. Sweetheart. Izumi grabbed a pair of rainbow sunglasses that Bakugo had bought and put them on her daughter's face. But regardless, she's not wrong. I have my fair share of scars as well. Then, without being asked, she lifted her shirt just enough to reveal her well-toned stomach. She had a few scars, but a couple stood out. There were 4 that were all the same size with the same distance between them. Were you stabbed with a pitchfork? Athos inquired. All for one, Hyujo answered for Athena, while Izuku put on a purple hoodie and grabbed a matching pair of purple sunglasses. I recognize those marks anywhere. Athena could only nod at Hyujo before she lowered her shirt and hoodie down. There was some heavy silence after that as the others finished getting ready. Athena looked over at Izumi, the girl cursing her hair. Her curls were wild as she was trying to undo her ponytail, but her curls were tangled around the hair tie. Athena walked up to her and put her hands on Izumi's shoulders so as not to startle the poor girl. Not that it mattered, because Izumi still jumped at the touch. Apologies, Athena said as she looked at the hair tie. Izumi sure enough had a lock of hair wrapped around it. More than a lock, actually. We'll have to cut the band. Your curls are too ensnared to come out normally. I know your pain. Hey, Athos, can I borrow a knife? Athena asked, and without hesitation, Athos brandished a knife from his boot. Here, stole it off of Stain. He grinned as he handed the knife to Athena. Athena just looked at him before she took the knife and focused back on Izumi. Electing to ignore what was just said, she cut through the hair tie with ease. I know your pain, Athena told Izumi as she let Izumi's hair fall around her shoulders. My hair constantly gets snagged in a hair tie. Even to this day, all thought when I had short hair it wasn't so bad. You cut your hair short? Izumi inquired, and Athena nodded. I cut it to about she. Athena grabbed onto Izumi's hair and pulled it back a bit before stopping right at the base of Izumi's neck. Here, it was a pixie cut. I had it short for a long time. It's also safer to have short hair. Villains can't grab it when it's short. Izumi thought about it. Short hair wouldn't be so bad. In all retrospect, it would certainly be easier to manage, and she didn't have to ask Nito to help deep condition her hair every week as it was getting long now. Still, Izumi looked at Athena's own ponytail, and her hair didn't look any longer than Izumi's own now. Why'd you grow your hair out? Izumi did not expect Athena's face to go scarlet. Well, she continued to blush while looking at the dilapidated ceiling. Hitoshi, my Hitoshi, that ish likes my hair long, she admitted softly. It was Minda who picked up on it because of course the creep would. Hitoshi. Minda turned towards Hitoshi, who also seemed to have caught on as his face went pink. I wasn't aware you like hair. Pull. A gust of wind then blew Minda into and through the wall as lightning flickered around Athena's fingers. Then she dusted her hands off like it was nothing. Okay, are we done? She asked the others, and it was decided they were done and they needed to get the hell of Dodge for the time being. Their goal wasn't exactly clear, but all they knew for now was that they weren't staying here and they needed a solid game plan for facing off against All for One. We shouldn't travel together, Izuku was the one to say it. 13 people not counting Bakugo and a cat are currently wanted by the HPSC. 14 of us are all walking together with a cat. Well, it's obvious. Moss tapped his translator. I can hide in a hoodie, no problem. Yes, well true, I just don't like the idea of all of us walking together. I know there's safety in numbers, but our numbers are bound to get us caught, he pointed out. Deku nodded. He's right. It should be best if we split up into groups. But we have no communication if we do that. Surprisingly, it was Denki who pointed that out as he sat on the bed. True, Mina grumbled while crossing her arms. Athena looked over at Athos. Athos, you seem to know the streets better than anyone. I do. Athos grinned at her. What would you say our best course of action would be? About time you asked. He grabbed his bat in his hands. I'd say we stick to the alleyway. Underground heroes usually don't look around those during the day as most of the action happens at night, and daylight heroes don't bother with alleys unless they hear a commotion. The day is still young after all. Not a bad plan, but you're forgetting something. Bakugo said you're all wanted. The heroes are going to double down looking for us. I'm betting the alleyways are being checked as we speak. Everyone sided that this would be so much easier if we had a car or something to help transport us. Mina whined and let her head hang. Izumi felt the wheels in her head start to slowly twist and turn at Mina's words. It would be easier if they had their own vehicle. Why don't wedges take the bus? She finally asked the others. After all, that's what these disguises are for. And if you're worried about us being in a group, we don't all get on at once. Some of us stay behind and catch up to the next bus stop or just pretend like we're running late. There was a silence. Deku would open his mouth but then shut it, as would Izuku. Even Moss looked thoughtful about her idea. That could work in all actuality. Deku finally said as he stood, but then he looked defeated. If one of us had a phone. He whined, if one of us had a phone, we could check the bus route in this area. And then we could break off into groups of 3 with Athena, myself, and Izuku leading, as we all have one for all and can move quicker than the rest. I see what you're saying, Athena said, seeing how we're also the strongest. We can carry people without worry and just wait at each bus stop. So it doesn't look too conspicuous with all 14 of us waiting at just one stop. Then she turned to a still grinning Athos and narrowed her eyes. You know the stops, don't you? Wow, you guys are so slow on the uptake. Yes, I know the stops. He laughed. I've lived in this area long enough to know each bus stop. You were just going to keep us in the dark, Ochako demanded with her hands on her hips, and Athos shrugged. Maybe. Do you want the stops or not? Yes, everyone, including Moss, shouted at Athos, and that just made him grin even more. Athos then put his goggles back over his eyes. The closet stop from here is the 29th block. After that, it's going to be the 31st block. And then the final one you want is 34th block. It's all in a straight line, at least 10 minutes apart. Athos explained quickly to them as he put his mask on. That is, of course, if Deku's world is like mine, it could be different, but it could be the same. That was true. It was a bit of a gamble, but one they had to take, and Athos knew this as he put his mask back on. Athos looked bulky as he refused to take off his original hoodie and was now wearing double layers. Okay, in order to do this, we're going to need 2 groups of 5 and 1 group of 4, Athena said firmly. Hitomi, you're with me, non-notifiable. Yes, Mommy, Hitomi obediently said. After a small bit of back and forth between everyone, it was decided. Deku on the 29th block was going to be Ochako, Minta, Moss, and Denki. With Athena on the 31st block, it was going to be Hitomi, Vet, and Athos. And finally, Izuku on the 34th block, it was going to be Mina, Hitoshi, Izumi, and Bakugo, to which Kyujo actually growled at the idea but said nothing more. Those not going to the 29th block were to be carried by their group leader to the next bus stop. Bakugo was not thrilled at being picked up. I can use my quirk. It's too loud to use. They'll know you're with us that way, Kak and Deku had explained to him, and Bakugo only snorted as Izuku picked him up with ease. Ma'am, you don't have to pick me up. I'm heavy, Vet had tried to say to Athena as she had gotten the others to hold on to her, but to his shock, she lifted him up with ease. He gasped, 5 people and you're still standing. Incredible. Athena grinned at his praise. I can pick up a fridge with ease. This is nothing, she reassured him. Hang on tight, she ordered, and everyone did remember the plan. She told the others, and with a gust of wind, she was gone. Whoa, Ochako breathed. She's faster than you, Deku. Not faster than me, no. Kyujo, I'll handle this, Izuku told his quirk everyone on. Yeah, before Bakugo could finish his grumble, they were also gone in a gust of wind, leaving the feeling of static in the air. Deku pondered. Yeah, make a point. Ochako, perhaps I should ask Mrs. Shinsu what her power is compared to mine. It never even crossed my mind he didn't have to carry his friend. Instead, they all had to walk except for Moss. Moss was being carried by Ochako and was loving it. Isn't it weird to call Athena Mrs. Shinsu? Minta asked as he propped his hood up. As did everyone else following his example. Deku put a purple bandana around his mouth and chin to keep his lower face hidden. After all, she is you. She's not me, Deku huffed. She's Welsh, is a different version of me. She's not me. No more than Moss is technically me. Moss nodded. He makes a point. After all, in my world, Izuku Midoriya is dead. Minta shrugged. But isn't it weird knowing that there's another you banging Shinsu? You don't say it like that. Please, Ochako asked as she put her sunglasses on over her eyes. That's just gross. Besides, from what I gathered, it's more than just banging as their husband and wife. Well, yeah, I'm just saying. Minta rolled his eyes at this, and Moss just shook his head and smacked Minta in the face with his paw. Enough. Just let it be. It's not weird. We all have our own lives, Moss hissed before he moved up to Ochako's shoulder. Ochako nodded at Minta firmly before turning away from him as they started their trek towards the bus stop on the 29th block. When they stepped outside and made it to the end of the block, they saw they were on the 27th block, 2 blocks to go. That does beg the question, though, Denki whispered while he matched his speed with Deku. How do you feel about all of this anyway? Deku sighed as he thought about it. It's interesting. I never had a clue that there are other versions of myself out there, and it makes me wonder what the other versions of you guys must be like. I mean, you remember how Izumi reacted to you, Denki? Denki rubbed his throat and pulled a face as he remembered the unforgiving punch Izumi had greeted him with. I want her to be comfortable around me, but I mean, you've all seen how she reacts. If I so much as step up to her, she gets all cagey. Well, you did try to kill her, Minta shrugged, and Denki snorted. I didn't try to kill her. The psychotic version of myself did. Denki yelled, and he got shushed by everyone, and Denki just threw his arms up. Regardless, just keep showing Izumi you aren't a threat, and hopefully she'll come around, Ochako told Denki. Denki only sighed and shook his head. They passed the 28th block by this point and could see the bus stop from where they were. Deku picked up the pace, and the others followed suit. I will say, the one that interests me the most is Athos, Ochako puffed as they broke into a jog. Athos, Deku asked and Ochako nodded. He's interesting. Unhinged. You mean Moss laughed and Ochako didn't disagree. They finally made it to the bus stop and Deku nodded at Ochako agreed. But he seems to know what he's doing. So there's that. Deku shrugged. Only time will really tell. They stood under the bus stop cover and in good time as with almost no warning it started to rain. Oh, Ochako whispered and Moss tucked himself into her hoodie and between her shoulder and neck. This is okay, right? Moss asked after he thought about it and realized that this wasn't his Hitoshi and not only that but Ochako may not be okay with this as Moss was technically Izuku. Yeah, just don't go any lower, she whispered back to him. Wasn't planning on it. The small drizzle turned into a downpour and it made the others frown as they waited for the bus. Where do you think we're going to go? Denki crossed his arms over his chest tightly to try and keep warm as the rain dropped the temperature outside. Unsure, somewhere safe. I hope safer than that motel, that is, Deku admitted while he watched the rain fall down and change the color of the sidewalk from a light gray to a darker one. Ochako peeled her hood back a little to look at Moss. You're warm, you know that. Moss purred at this, the pros of being a cat. A fat cat. I can see Hitoshi enjoys giving you treats, Minta said, and Moss bristled. It's fur. Shush, Deku ordered as he gently moved Ochako's hood back with good reason. A stranger came by and sat at the stop with them. Phew. Busy night, the man commented. He had wild blue hair and orange freckles all over his face and arms. He wore a jacket like them, and Deku was happy with the surprise rain now, as well as nurse's scrubs with Chibai All Mights all over the top and bottoms. He had a name tag, but Deku couldn't see it from where he was. He just nodded at the man in return and made sure his bandana was snug over his nose and mouth. Well, thankfully the bus didn't take too much longer through the rain. They saw the headlights of the bus peek through the rain and relaxed. The bus came to a loud stop beside them and they had to wait a few seconds before the doors opened with a squeak. They all thankfully had some money on them to pay for the bus fare, minus Ochako, but Deku was more than happy to pay for her. Moss stayed hidden in Ochako's hoodie as they knew he probably wouldn't be allowed on the bus. Everyone found a seat near one another, with Deku and Kaminari sitting together and Minta sitting with Ochako and Moss behind Deku. Thankfully, the bus was relatively empty but would fill up soon. The bus would take off before too long and Deku felt himself relax just a tad. Denki looked at Deku and swallowed hard while he tapped his thumbs nervously. Just relax, Deku demanded, and Denki just looked at him uneasily. I'm just nervous. I know. Deku patted Denki's hand gently. Just relax, he repeated. The bus moves along the wet road as the rain continues to pour heavily outside. The bus came to its stop on the 31st block stop and Deku nearly smiled when Athena and her daughter stepped on. Athena had her bandana over her face with Hitomi wearing rainbow sunglasses and an oversized hoodie. The hoodie Hitomi had on was so big it could be a dress. Oh, she's adorable, the blue-haired man said when Athena sat across from him. Athena gave the man a smile, but it couldn't be seen with the bandana. I know, Hitomi responded 100% confidently and deadpan while holding on to the hinge of the sunglasses. And that made Deku grin. He had to look away before he laughed out loud. It is my God-given right to carry this bat on this bus, came Athos's outburst from the front of the bus, and Athena put her hand to her face with a groan. Forgive my brother, sir, came Vet's worried and sudden voice. He's been dropped on the head one too many times as a baby. Hey, he's not well, sir, I promise you I was harmless. Either the bus driver didn't get paid enough or just stopped caring because he waved them off, and the two got on without any trouble. Athos promptly sat his butt down with the man with blue hair and orange freckles. I like your freckles, the man complimented Athos, and Athos swiveled to look at him. Thanks, Athos grunted rather rudely in Deku's opinion, before focusing on Athena and Hitomi. Vet sat in the seat above theirs and sighed while scratching at his hair. I'll tell you what, I'm ready to lay down, isn't that right, brother? Athos promptly flipped Vet the bird in response. You two behave, Athena hissed in a truly motherly fashion that made both boys tense visibly. The man with blue hair laughed at this. Have your hands full, do you? 3 children and no father in sight. Children, both Athos and Vet cried at the same time, and Athena once again sighed and planted her face in her hand. Might as well be, she responded tiredly, and Ochako snorted before correcting herself briefly. The bus started to move again, and now all they had to was wait for the others and then determine where they wanted to stop and rest for the night, preferably somewhere with running water and no occupied by rodents and roaches. How old are you? The man asked Hitomi, and Athena grabbed her daughter's arm rather protectively, creating a small barrier between the man and Hitomi. 13, Hitomi answered honestly while kicking her legs back and forth. Deku was watching Athos and noted how the boy's eyes were narrowed, but the man couldn't see this as Athos kept his back to the stranger. What a young woman you are, the man said with a grin, and Athena just nodded towards the man. So, boys, Athena said tersely to gain Athos's and Vet's attention, what do you guys want to do for dinner? It's getting late. Clever, Deku noted. I dunno. Ma. Athos sighed and rubbed his face rather tiredly. How about the mall? They got a food court. This time Athena didn't have to put her face in her hands. Deku did it for her with a grunt. I was thinking. Ochako pushed into Deku to gain his attention. The mall sounds great. Yeah, it's crowded, but they have plenty of food options. Deku then realized that he was being a bit of a jerk. Athos wanted cover, and the mall was actually pretty good for that. There were so many people in the mall that our odds of being spotted were pretty slim. Actually, Achai. Deku cursed himself for nearly saying Ochako's name out loud. That's not a bad idea. We'll see about the mall, son. Athena's voice was rather tense as she had to spit out the dreaded word of son at Athos. We're still waiting on my friend. Don't forget. Yeah, Athos dug through his ear with his pinky finger while slouching in his seat. His stop is coming, he grumbled. The bus would come to a stop and those squeaky doors opened. The first to board was Bakugo, who paid and then carried on. He took a seat next to Vet with a grunt. Hitoshi was next, and he sat a seat above the man with blue hair. Then came Mina, who skipped happily to Vet's seat. Izumi was next to last, and she looked around and chose to sit just above Vet, despite the fact that Denki's seat was still open. Izuku came last, acting like he was just catching the bus right on time. Woo. Sorry, thought I was gonna miss you for a minute, he laughed to the bus driver before he paid in turn. Despite the bandana and hood covering his face, they could all see it when he turned. His face contorted into one of horror as he took a sudden step back and bumped into the fare machine. His breath picked up loudly into scared, panicked breaths, and with no warning he scaredly reached for the doors. Once he touched them and figured out where they were, he left, nearly tripping on his way down. Everyone quickly looked at one another in confusion at his reaction. Sir, the bus driver called in both concern and impatience. Deku spotted Izuku stumbling towards the nearest building, hand over his mouth looking like he was going to vomit. His skin suddenly went pale while he turned his back towards the bus, and it didn't take a genius to see that he was. He was crying. The way his shoulders shook gave it away. Watch Hitomi, Athena demanded to Vet before she stood and took off for the front of the bus. She bowed to the bus driver before she got off and rushed outside in the rain towards Izuku. Hey, she started, and Izuku cut her off. We're not getting on that bus, Izuku told her, his voice quivering. I can't promise I can hold Kyujo back. I can't. Slow down, Athena demanded as she put her hands up and cautiously approached him. Tell me what's happened. What's going on, and can you look at me? Please, Izuku would, his eyes now red-ringed and wet with both tears and rain that was sliding down his face. His whole body was shaking. He reminded Athena of herself some years ago, too scared to open her mouth, too scared to speak about the unspeakable. He then shook his head and put his hands over his mouth. Only Kyujo knows, he squeaked in fear. Well, me father and Nedzu also know, but though I don't. He shook his head. Athena reached, but paused, and drew her hand back. Izuku, I can't help you if I don't know what's happening, she told him rather bluntly. I want to help. I do. Please, let me help you. Izuku looked back towards the ground and put his hand over his mouth again. That man, he whispered, that man, blue hair and orange freckles in my universe. His voice turned high-pitched, hurt and scared as he continued to shake. He nearly molested me. And Athena listened, and she understood. God, did she understand? Out of everyone on that bus, Athena was sure she was probably the only one to understand Izuku's pain and sorrow of seeing his assailant again. As Izuku retold his story to her, leaving out a few key details she observed but didn't question, she quietly listened, despite the bus driver growing more and more agitated when he was done and when his hair started to turn white, showing that his control was slipping and he was giving Kyujo control. She knew what needed to be done. She patted Izuku's shoulder before hugging him, and he returned the hug. Hold my hand and sit with Hitomi and me. We need you on that bus, Izuku. She then grabbed his hand into hers. You sit so close to him. We'll move back with Deku and the others when we sit. I want you to. I'll go into the back of your mind, like when you talk to Kyujo. Keep him at bay. Can you do that for me? She held his hand tightly in hers, and he nodded but looked unsure. Don't know if I can keep Kyujo at bay. That's what scares me. He has been quiet since he saw that man, and knew when Kyujo is quiet, it's deadly. Athena had to think about it. Then she snapped her fingers. Now, what if I just... She activated Black Whip, and with Black Whip she wrapped it tightly around Izuku's arms, keeping them pinned. I know you're on a leash, but at least if Kyujo does get out, he can't attack you, she suggested. The bus driver blared his horn, demanding they hurry up before he left them behind. You can try, he whispered nervously, and Athena nodded. It's worth a try. Don't let go of your quirk no matter what, okay? Izuku could only nod while looking down. He looked like a kid in trouble as Athena led him back on the bus. Both bowed to the bus driver. They didn't even get to sit before the bus took off. Sweetie, we're moving seats, Athena called to her daughter in a sweet voice, and Hitomi perked at her mother's call. I want you behind the nice man in the best jeanist hoodie. Honey, mommy will be there in just a moment. Hitomi got up. Never one to question her mother's command, got up obediently and sat behind Deku, leaning against the back of his seat to watch her mother. Oh, son and second son, I think you should move to let the man have some space. Vet and Athos looked at one another, shrugged, and got up as well at this. Bakugo, Hitoshi, and Izumi also moved, sensing something was clearly up. Oh, they're not in you, if that was his name in this universe, blinked, but Athena cut him off. It's better back there, you know, children. Rowdy bunch they are. This one here. Athena huffed a laugh as she gestured towards Izuku, who was walking with her. He looked ready to faint the closer they got. And you has a sentient quirk, and the quirk can get quite loud, she explained, and none too soon, because Kyujo lunged with no warning. No words were said. Kyujo, true to his name, was like a rabid dog as he snarled and tried to get the man. But Athena kept her grip on him tight and Yu jumped and pressed himself firmly against his window in surprise. And God, if Athena didn't feel like she was wrangling a rabid dog as she yanked him back with firm shouts of, "No, no, that's enough. I'll end you." Kyujo threatened the man. "Come near my host and I'll break all your fingers off and shove them down your fucking throat." It wasn't Athena that activated Black Whip and wrapped it around Kyujo's mouth. It was Deku. "All bark, no bite, I swear," Athena promised anew while she and Deku both worked on getting Kyujo to the back of the bus with Hitomi. "Jesus," Izumi whispered as she watched them pass with wide eyes. Once in the back came the hardest part, trying to do all of the quietly. Kyujo clearly wasn't going to back down. Athena could only wonder if the quirk was throwing a tantrum at this point as he thrashed and fought against her, but to his credit it was clear that Izuku was maintaining some control as One for All wasn't being used. A godsend. Nether was All for One, another godsend. Athena tried to get him into a seat, but Kyujo wasn't sitting still. Athena personally couldn't blame him. He wanted to protect his host, a noble feat in all its worth, but damn it, this wasn't the time. But would you back down? He's out there, Fujiwara. If he approached you, even in this universe, would you let it slide? Would you allow it? She found herself asking. It was a question Athena didn't know the answer to. It took Athena, Deku, and Bakugo all to dogpile Kyujo into a seat and keep him pinned. "Calm down. Calm down," Athena demanded as she tried to keep him still. "God damn it, calm down," Bakugo hissed in the quirk's ear. "I don't know what your problem is, you crazy motherfucker, but you're going to get us caught." Pop. Kyujo went stiff, a pink feathered dart poking out of his neck before he continued to struggle, now a little more violently, clearly enraged. But before too long his struggles died slowly and he went into a forceful sleep. All eyes turned towards Vet. Vet had his gun in his lap and had it hidden by the seat and out of view of the driver or other passengers. Vet rubbed his face and then put his gun back on his back, followed by putting on the hoodie that kept the gun hidden from the driver. "I told you, I'm not the worst shot," Vet whispered while he scratched at his neck. "They'll thank me later, hopefully." Izumi had to twist in her seat to look at Vet. "Why waste your only tranquilizer on him?" she softly inquired, and Vet licked his lips. "It's not a waste. He was going to get us caught with how crazy he was acting. Also, I live on a rural farm, dear. I know a cornered and scared animal when I see one. It was for his own safety and the safety of that man up there." The question was in the air as they watched Kyujo's hair go from white to green. It would curl back up before too long. Nobody asked the question that Athena currently only knew the answer to. "And you would get off the bus?" He would toss their strange group a look, and Athena made it a point to look him dead in the eyes as he did so. That's the tragic thing about people like you, ordinary people who worked ordinary jobs. They just look like normal people. It was decided on the mall. Everyone was hungry and they could think of their next move from there. Plus the mall wasn't far. What wasn't fun was that someone was stuck carrying Izuku. Deku took up the mantle and had Izuku on his back in a piggyback ride. Izuku was dead to the world. "Hey, when does that stuff wear off anyway?" Athena asked Vet while they walked towards the food court, ignoring the stares they were getting. "Let's see, I put enough in it to knock out a coyote." Vet thought about it. "I'd say somewhere between 4 hours to 6 hours maybe." "Great," Bakugo grumbled as he shook his head. "We can't walk around with this moron knocked unconscious, you know." "I know. Then what are we going to do?" Athena rubbed her face vigorously. "I'll look into hotels around here as soon as possible, I guess." "Am I crazy? Is that Todoroki?" Ochako asked suddenly, and both Athena and Bakugo turned towards her voice. Todoroki wasn't even trying to hide, and neither was Endeavor. "Turns out it's hard to be stealthy when you have one of your own unconscious." Athena ran in front of everyone. When Endeavor made strides towards them, she was literally toe-to-toe with Endeavor, forcing the man to a stop. "If you're here to take us, it won't be easy," she threatened her old mentor. Endeavor snorted. "You are horrible at hiding, you know that. Several people claim to have spotted you guys here before you even walked through the door." Athena bristled. "We're not here to capture you," Shoto told her, and she looked at him before relaxing just a tad. "While we should hand you to the HPSC, Shoto insists we work together to bring down this new threat. I don't like it, but I'm curious," Endeavor admitted. Athena sighed softly and then looked back at their group before focusing back on Endeavor. "No tricks," she whispered so only Endeavor could hear her. "No tricks. The HPSC has no idea I'm doing this," he promised her. "Fine, because we're hungry. We're tired and I don't have a plan," Athena admitted, and Endeavor nodded almost like he understood. It was rather nice. Still, he pointed to Izuku on Deku's back. "What happened to that one?" "A long story. He's been sedated and let's leave it at that." So, they moved on and things were really looking upwards. With the Todoroki's help, they may have a shot against All for One. The question still hung in the air. Where was he? And more importantly, why was he being quiet? Finally getting some food in their stomachs and being able to relax, at least for just a little while, without the threat of the HPSC or All for One, Everyone was a little less high-strung as they all sat in Enji's living room, minus Izuku, who was currently resting in one of Todoroki's guest room, knocked out to the world with no signs of waking anytime soon when Athena helped Deku drop him off into the bed. The boy was drooling pretty heavily, but alive, and Athena did check his pupils. He was fine. Now, here they were with the sun starting to go down on their second day here. Well, second day for those that didn't belong in this universe. That was so much had happened in just one day. And for Athena, she had spent too long awake. Nearly 48 hours at this point. The moment Athena laid down on the couch, she had just meant to lay down for a few minutes and not hog the Todoroki couch for herself. She passed out immediately, one arm draped over the end of the couch with her legs taking up all 4 seats. Athena had her head resting on the armrest and was dead to the world. We were supposed to be talking about all for one, Enji grumbled as he looked down at the resting Athena. Let her sleep, Athos told him as he threw a blanket over Athena's sleeping form. She's been awake longer than the rest of us. Hitomi walked up to her mother without a care in the world. She crawled on the couch and pressed herself against her mom before wriggling under the blanket. Athena didn't even so much as stir. It's probably best if we wait anyways. We're all exhausted after everything. Vet rubbed his tired eyes as he sat on the floor. Ochako joined him on the floor along with Denki. Hitoshi was already asleep in a chair adjacent to the couch with Moss resting in his lap. Everyone's bellies were full and now all they wanted to do was rest. Enji took a head count and then turned towards Shoto's room. He let the others rest as he quietly stalked up to his son's room where he can hear Bakugo, Deku, and Shoto all talk. Deku and Bakugo bringing Shoto up to speed. Enji listened in and realized they were talking about the other versions of Izuku. Athena is the oldest and Hitomi's mother. We haven't seen her use her quirk yet, but I'm sure she's strong, maybe even stronger than Izuku. Deku explained to Shoto. She has a level head on her shoulders. The same can't be said for Kyujo. Crazy motherfucker. He nearly got us caught because he tried to attack some rando. Bakugo shook his head. I swear he was trying to take a bite out of the rando. Deku then chimed in. The thing is, Kaken, I don't think that guy was just a rando to Izuku. You saw how scared he looked. I'm almost 90% sure Kyujo did what he did out of what he thought a necessity. Izuku told me. Kyujo only really comes out that violently when he fears his host's safety is at risk. Neither of you were here for this, but Izumi had a similar moment with Kaminari. Dun's face. How, in her world, Kaminari tried to kill her, so when our Kaminari approached her, she reacted how she saw fit. She punched him in the throat to incapacitate him. There was a pause as everyone just let it soak in. I guess that would explain why whenever Dun's face gets close to her, she makes it a point to move away from him. But that begs the question, that man on the bus, what did he do to Izuku in his world? Bakugo asked. We may never know. It's not our place to know, Deku told him. Shoto then finally spoke. What about that other you? The one with the baseball bat? Athos, Deku said, and it sounded like he was nodding his head. We actually don't know a lot about him, just that it's unhinged. I think Athena knows more about him than we do. She at least knows how to wrangle him, and I'm pretty sure he's a vigilante. And a creep, Bakugo grumbled darkly. This made Shoto snort. Another Mainta. Not fully. We had an incident, but he's corrected himself. Still creep. I see, Shoto hummed. That's a lot to take in, but it's good to know. Thank you guys for filling me in. Now the next thing to do is figure out how we're going to get the others home, and of course, all for one. And now the HPSC, Deku whispered. And now the HPSC, Bakugo repeated. Enji, having heard enough, walked away from his son's door. He walked towards the guest room and opened the door a crack to look at his guest. Izuku was fast asleep on his side, his breathing regulated and normal when it was clear he was dead to the world. Enji shut the door. He then walked down his hallway and opened the hallway closet. He pulled some blankets out of the closet and returned to the living room. Now everyone was laying on the ground, save for Athena and her daughter who were on the couch. Enji sighed and gave out blankets, tossing blankets over those on the floor or in the chair. Once everyone had a blanket and was clearly passed out, needing the rest from such a wild day, Enji nodded, shut off the lights and went to bed himself. Tomorrow is a new day and much needed to be discussed. Athena's eyes opened slowly as she blinked herself awake. With a soft groan, she looked at the ceiling above her head. She didn't recognize this ceiling, but she remembered what happened the day prior and knew where she was, as much as she wished it hadn't happened. Hitomi was still pressed against her mother, and Athena gently ran her fingers through her daughter's wild hair. Hitomi's hair felt greasy, and Athena was gonna have to ask Endeavor if they could use his shower. Slowly and gently she sat up and looked for the time. She couldn't see a clock anywhere, but she knew by looking outside that it was very early in the morning. Athena was careful as she extracted herself from her daughter's vice-like grip and stretched herself out with a grunt. Then she stood. Her sock-clad feet made little to no noise as she slipped out of the living room and into the kitchen. Athena looked at the time, 5:26 a.m. The oven told her, and she had no reason to doubt it. Athena rubbed her face tiredly and then yawned. She looked for the door outside and would find it down the hallway. Athena stepped out of the house, but kept the door open a crack. She then reached into a pouch on her leg and found her cigarettes, packing them on her palm. She opened the pack. That was already missing a cigarette. She then popped it into her mouth and lit it with her light. She inhaled deeply. The cigarette smoke filled her lungs, and Athena felt her body relax as her mind buzzed ever so slightly now that she got a hit of nicotine. That'll kill you. Athena turned in surprise towards the door before she relaxed visibly and exhaled the smoke. Moss had opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air with her. The cat sat by her feet and Athena brought the cigarette back up to her mouth. Inhale. I don't smoke a lot, just to calm my nerves, she told the cat before she bent down, cigarette still in her mouth, and picked Moss up by his underarms. She gave Moss easy access to her shoulder and the cat took her up on her offer. He draped across her shoulders like a scarf and got cozy. So, what are you doing up this early? She inquired, and Moss shrugged. I'm a cat. I'm nocturnal. Ah, silly me. She smiled at Moss before inhaling on her cigarette again. So, what's your story, little guy? I don't think I was here for that. Moss explained his story to her. How he came to be a cat. About Nice. All of it. He left nothing out. By the time he was done, Athena had finished her cigarette and was just listening to him interreasing. She finally said once Moss was finished explaining, I'm sorry you had to resort to killing yourself. However, Athena patted his head and gently ran her hand down his spine. Moss shrugged. At first I was pissed, but over time I learned to accept it. This was my life and it was my own actions that led me here, nobody else. Good boy, Athena whispered, and Moss just snorted. Anyways, I think the others are starting to wake. Moss jumped from her shoulder, landed on his feet. He then clawed at the ground beneath him. How can you tell? I'm a cat. Moss informed her of the obvious. My hearing is no joke. Now if you don't mind, I'm starved and gonna see if Fayumi will throw me some scraps out of pity, he said almost cheekily before he put a chest translator away with a click of a button and walked back inside, where he would then let out the most pitiful whine to garner sympathy from the oldest Todoroki. Godspeed, little dude. Godspeed, Athena laughed before she headed back inside as well. The sun starting to peek through the morning sky. A new dawn, a new day. Let's hope this is our last one here, she whispered to herself once she shut the door behind her. The others were waking, all of them natural early risers it would seem. Athos walked by her, stopped, and sniffed the air before turning towards her. You smell like cigarettes. I suppose I do, Athena told him, and he gave a tired sigh. Can I have one? I haven't had a smoke in a while and I need one, man. Athena thought about it before she decided to save the no, you're a teenager speech. Athos, like her, was stressed, so she gave him one. You only get one from me, she informed him before she gave him her lighter. Roger, thanks. Then he was outside. Athena then walked into the kitchen. Vet was also up and making a coffee while Fayumi was at the stove, making food. Angie was also awake and reading the newspaper. You guys are plastered everywhere, Angie commented when Athena walked past him. How do you plan to rectify this? Athena had to think about it. I don't know, she would finally admit. I still don't have a plan. Angie grunted. Achako and Minda also walked into the kitchen. Achako offered to help Fayumi and was denied. Minda took up a chair and just laid his head down, still tired and needing a few more minutes to fully wake up. Endeavor. Athena had her back to the counter and pulled a mug down from the cabinet to place next to Vet's. I want to say thank you for housing us. Endeavor grunted. I was hoping if it's all right if we can use your shower. Another grunt as he turned. He Page, I suppose if you must. Before that, I request that you sit with me and we discuss all for one. Oh, of course, I was honestly asking on my daughter's behalf anyways. I know she needs one more than I do. Very well. Vet poured her a cup of coffee and Athena gave him a nod of thanks. Hitoshi came into the kitchen. A blanket it wrapped around his shoulders as he tried to rub the sleep from his eyes. Kufi, he moaned like a zombie, and Athena moved out of the way to allow him access to the machine. I must ask, Endeavor now put the paper away, folding it up so it's not in the way of anything in your world. Who is it that you're married to? Is it Shoto perchance? He could have heard a pin drop as everyone, even his own daughter, was looking at Angie Todoroki with wide and, honestly, disbelieving eyes. How could he not know who Athena was married to? Athena only smiled her. No, I figured my daughter's looks gave it away whom I was married to. But in case it wasn't obvious, let me give you a bigger hint without missing a beat. Athena grabbed Hitoshi's shoulder and yanked him beside her so Endeavor could see him in clear view. Then she opened both arms and showed Hitoshi off to Endeavor. Hitoshi's face was pink as he buried his face in his hand. Endeavor just grunted once more as his face gave a clear tick. At this, I see in a view, he inquired right as Izumi walked into the kitchen, rubbing her sleeping eyes. Do you have an interest in my Shoto? Izumi looked tired, and this being the very first question she was being asked at 6 in the morning didn't do her any favors. I've never even had a conversation with Shoto Todoroki, she tiredly sighed while she kept walking into the kitchen while pinching between her eyes. Another grunt. But that was all for now. Everyone went about their business as more of them started to wake up. Athena helped set the table with Fayumi, and once that was done she went to take her daughter up. Breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast was served and everyone started to eat. Hey, Vet, Kaminari called between a mouthful of food. Should Izuku be? It was no sooner had Kaminari started was there was a sound pounding off feet down a hallway, and then the kitchen door was thrown open. Who the fuck sedated us? Hyujo roared at the top of his lungs. Never mind, Kaminari said in a whisper. That didn't skip a beat though, and the others had to give him props for that. I did, he said while sipping his black coffee. Kyujo looked almost like Bakugo as he was frothing in anger, his eyes going white and big as he gnashed his teeth together. That didn't look the least bit scared or bothered as he put his coffee down. You were acting erratic and violent. You were going to get us caught as he tried to fight that man on the bus. I don't know what that man did to you in your universe, but all that matters is that we're not in your universe, and that man was no more than a stranger to you. I did what was right, and I will not apologize for such a thing now. Vet then turned in his seat to look Kyujo dead in his eyes. Are you going to behave? Kyujo looked at Vet for several long seconds and to everyone's surprise actually started to laugh. You know you have spunked. I can give you that, Kyujo said as he took a seat with a huff. Where is Izuku? Deku asked, and Kyujo only smiled. Sleeping still. I woke first, so until he wakes, you're all stuck with me. Actually, that's kind of a good thing, Athena hummed from her spot. We were just about to talk about All for One, and you're perfect for being here. For those unaware, not only that, but you and I were the only ones to go toe-to-toe with All for One from what I know. Kyujo shrugged. Fine. Kyujo then honed in on Endeavor sitting on the head of the table and looked like he wanted to say something. But something rare happened. He held his tongue. Deku then spoke. Let's start with what we all know, All for One. This All for One that ISIS Izuku Midoriya. He's one of us, he's more powerful, and he looks to be about your age, Athena. I noticed she agreed with Deku and he nodded. He wants to kill us, but why? What did we do? Izumi demanded. I don't know. He only said it was killing myself in the worst way possible. Deku looked at his empty plate. So, he brought us together just to kill us. But that doesn't seem right, because with what he was saying it sounds like he didn't know just who we were. Right. You're right, Athena told him. If he would have known who we were, he would have called our names, not some cryptic message. So, it sounds like he doesn't know who exactly we are, he just knows our quirks. Kyujo exhaled at this as he thought about it. He then got up to make himself a mug of coffee. He's the hunter. We're the prey. He doesn't care who we are after all. He already had a certain quirk that some of us have. Deku and Athena both nodded in understanding. Kyujo got his coffee and sat back down at the table. He already told us what he wanted. Fun. He's bored because he won, so decided to make it all of our problem. Is there any way we can just blast him back to his universe? Kaminari inquired tiredly. If we knew how he got us all here, Izumi actually responded him as she pressed her hand to her cheek. And the only thing we know about that is that a bright light swept us all away from where we were and brought us here. Athos grumbled. Well, let's move away from that for a moment. As we'll go nowhere, let's talk about his quirks. What do we need to be on the lookout for? Endeavor inquired, and that was when all eyes were on All Kyujo. Kyujo smirked. All for One isn't a complicated quirk, he told Endeavor simply. It's actually simple. He can take whatever quirk and use it or get rid of it. However, has a disadvantage. He's not completely like me, I've realized. He's not? Mina asked with a blink. Kyujo suddenly smiled big as he stood excitedly. No, has one big weakness compared to me. All for One is inside Izuku Midoriya. They fused body and mind, you see, meaning All for One has to either use his tendrils or touch you physically to take your quirk if he wants it. I can take quirks from a distance, and I can take quirks from a long distance and do it while my host is sleeping. And I can't repeat this enough, I'm an emitter. Athena had a glint in her eyes. You can take his quirks from a distance. If I must, yes. However, Kyujo became serious again. There's a problem. He's most likely faster and cunning than the All for One from my world. He has a healthy body and isn't tied to life support like he was in my world. I hate to say it, if I were to go up against alone, I'd lose. He then shook his head. Well, it's a good thing you aren't alone, Kyujo, Deku told him with a smile. I'm sure with all of us, we can come up with a plan. Well, I have something, Izumi shyly spoke as she traced a pattern from table with her finger. We have heavy hitters. Athena, Endeavor, Kyujo, and Izuku. Deku, Bakugo, and Shoto. You're the strongest out of all of us. Ochako, Mina, Minta, and Kaminari. You're the second heaviest. Your quirks are powerful, but they're probably not powerful enough to go up against All for One. Then the ones that need to stay away: Hitomi for obvious reasons, Hitoshi, Vet, Moss, Athos, and myself. If we attempt to fight this All for One, we'd be nothing more than paste on the ground. There was a silence. Athena then nodded. You're right, I think. She then stood from her seat as she looked at Deku and Kyujo. We need to compare our quirks. We need to see who of us has the best control. The more powerful of us will go up against All for One, while the other hangs back as support. This way, when we do fight him, we'll be sending our strongest first and foremost. Deku swallowed hard. Well, I'll go first. I'm at 40%. I can go up to 45 if I push it, but any more and well, I think you'll know. 50. Kyujo raised his hand up as he said it. We've just reached 50. We've unlocked almost every ability there is, and with my help, it's been amplified, so we hit pretty heavy. 100, Athena said firmly, and the other two's eyes went wide at that. I've mastered it years ago. I can use my quirk to its fullest. Hit us, Kyujo demanded as he stood. As I said, I amplify my own quirk. My 50 could be your 100. I'm not going to hit you at full strength. I'll kill you. Athena scoffed and put her hands on her hips. This time Kyujo scoffed as he sat back down. Then, no sooner had he sat did he, Deku, and Athena all feel it at once, a sharp stab in the back of their heads, that sharp stab telling them the exact same thing at once. Danger. Get down. Athena wasted no time grabbing Hitomi and Izumi and forcing them to the ground, and it was none too soon as something smashed into the Todoroki house at full speed. The house broke easily as the wall, ceiling, and tile fell all around them, causing everyone to scream. It sounded like a bomb, and for a real moment Athena feared it was. It wasn't, but God, did she wish it was. Once she saw what did the damage. A large Namu let out an enraged roar to the sky, its shriek feral and deadly, and it wasn't alone. Another Namu, this one thinner than the behemoth that had crashed through the wall, jumped and stuck to the wall and crawled along it, its deformed mouth open and its long tongue slipping down way past its body, almost to the floor. It reminded Athena of Tsu. Then came the final Namu, its eyes dead and lifeless as it snapped its jaw repeatedly, its teeth made of metal, wide and large. It had claws also looking like they were made of metal and ready to slash. Athena didn't hesitate as she got off of Izumi and Hitomi. Take Hitomi, she demanded of Izumi, and go out the front door. We'll handle it, vet. Athos, go with them. Izumi only nodded and ran for the door with Hitomi's hand in hers. Vet was quick to run with them, but not Athos. Athos took his bat off of his back and held it like he was getting ready to swing. Absolutely not. Athos hissed to Athena, I'm staying. There was a scream before Izumi, Vet, and Hitomi returned just as quickly as they left. There's more. Oh God. There's more blocking the front door. Izumi cried to Athena, what are those things? He's blocked us all in. Bakugo growled as his palms started to pop softly, and he looked at Deku. Deku nodded. It appears so. Fine, Athena hissed as she got down in a running position and stared at the Namu in front of her. If it's a fight he wants. Using one for all, she felt her power surge beneath her skin as she glared at the massive Namu that had broke through the wall. Then it's a fight he's going to get. She then charged for the biggest Namu with all she had smash. She roared as she threw a punch and sent the large Namu flying through the hole it had made earlier. Then it was a shit show. Others charged to fight against the Nomus. Izumi, Fayumi, Vet, and Hitomi quickly hid behind the kitchen table that Endeavor had purposely flipped to make a barrier for them. Deku and Kyujo worked together to fight against the Namu on the ceiling, with Kyujo grabbing the Namu by its tongue to yank it down to their level. Deku then threw a smash at the Namu's face to send the thing to the ground. Kyujo went low, so low that he was nearly face to face with the ground before he charged. Kyujo jumped into the air and using one for all, he felt the lightning dancing around him in bright red streaks before he kicked the Namu with all of his strength. The Namu's head was soon everywhere as BLD went flying, and so did brain matter. I could use some help here, came Athos's cry, and both turned to see Athos using his trusty bat to stop the Namu with metal teeth from taking a bite out of him before either could move. Bakugo came to Athos's aid. Bakugo jumped on the Namu's shoulders and put both of his hands over the beast's bug eyes. Bakugo's hands started to heat up, and the Namu lost interest in Athos as it backed away with a shriek that made their ears bleed. Namu's eyes started to melt, pulling down its cheeks as it tried to shake Bakugo off of it. There were loud shaking and thunderous booms, and Athos could see Athena still coming to blows with the bigger Namu outside, and he nearly ran to help her, but before he could, the fourth and fifth Nomus made themselves known. The fourth one looked like the other two, only lankier, and green froth was coming out of its mouth while its bug eyes focused solely on those hiding behind the kitchen table, and it opened its mouth, green sludge running down its beak. With a yell, Athos charged and swung his bat like he was getting ready to make a home run. He took the Namu's right kneecap out with a loud pop, and a crack. The Namu crumpled, but it had regeneration and quickly regained itself and focused solely on Athos now. I got you. Ochako touched the Namu's back and the Namu flew to the ceiling. It let out a scream before opening its mouth and let out an unholy belch before it spat green slime at them. Nope, not slime. Acid. Acid that burned the ground it landed on. When Athos managed to dodge out of the way, the green acid burned through the floor and just kept burning. The Namu continued to struggle and scream while struggling against Ochako's quirk. Shoto ran up to them and used his ice. With a wave of his hand, he was quick to impale the Namu with a glacier of ice and then encase the Namu from the inside out. Athos heard a screech and turned. The fifth Namu was being burned to nothing more than a crisp by Endeavor, holding tightly on it like he was giving the beast a big bear hug. This is easy. All for one isn't going to know what's going to hit him, Athos thought while he watched as one by one Nomus were picked off. Even the massive Namu that Athena was brawling with was taken care of as Athena had smashed its head in. All for one wasn't going to know what hit him. Bakugo let out a cry and Athos turned towards him just in time to see Bakugo being thrown off of the Namu with metal teeth and claws. The Namu had managed to slash at Bakugo with its massive claws and tear through his clothes like they were nothing but butter. Bakugo had 4 angry red and bleeding scratches across his chest and Athos ran for him. Are you okay? Athos asked while he started to take off his hoodie. Clearly not. Bakugo hissed, and he let out a growl when Athos used his hoodie to try and soak up the BLD. Athos saw something approaching out of the corner of his eye, and he whipped out the knife he stole from Stain. Just as he turned, he put his hand on the hilt of the knife and got ready to plunge the knife into the Namu. The Namu's massive mouth clamped around Athos's right arm that still had the knife clasped in his hand. The Namu's teeth were piercing Athos's arm, causing rivulets of BLD to trail down his arm and splatter on the ground. I wouldn't move if I were you, came a voice from directly behind Athos. A voice that made him break out into a cold sweat. Nobody saw All for One enter. He was just there directly behind Athos. Oh, look at you. All for One almost seemed to coo as his fingers ghosted across the back of Athos's neck, making Athos flinch. Hey, Athos growled. Porkless, not an ounce of power in your BLD. But you're strong and you're armed to the teeth, as I can see. That's not your only knife. You're a vigilante. What a shame. Get away from him. Athena stepped into the room from the hole in the wall as she stood tall and unafraid. No, perhaps you should get away from me. All for One raised his hand up, his middle finger and thumb touching like he was getting ready to snap his fingers. All it takes is for me to snap my fingers and your little vigilante will lose his arm. Do you want to risk it? All for One challenged, and for a moment nobody moved. Nobody wanted to risk it. All for One smiled as he looked around the house at everyone standing around him waiting for his next move. A lot more than what I was expecting, that's for sure. However, there are two missing. How rude. I wanted to meet all of you before I bash your skulls in. Kyujo let out a growl from deep in his throat as kept his body low, poised for an attack, his fingers touching the ground. Never keeping his eyes off of All for One, he wished nothing more than for his host to wake. But that didn't seem to be happening anytime soon, so Kyujo waited as he cautiously watched All for One. All for One's eyes met his and his face broke into a terrifying grin. Ah, I've seen you. You're the sentient quirk. You're like myself. I am nothing like you. Kyujo spat as his body started to bristle. I'm not even called All for One. I'm called Kyujo. And don't you forget it. Enough of this. It was Endeavor that took a brave step forward, and All for One raised his hand up, his fingers ready to snap. Need I remind you? Endeavor, his boy, is at my mercy. Take another step and he'll lose his arm. I swear it. All for One looked over his shoulder at the hero and then smiled. Tell me, do you know about Dabai yet? The villain. Yes, I've had a run-in with him. No, you simpleton. Do you know who Dabai is? Because I do. In fact, his smile grew into an unsettling one. So does she? He pointed at Athen, whose eyes went wide, and so does the cat. I'm sure. He looked over at the dining table where Moss was standing, poised looking ready to pounce. And so do you. He leaned in close to Athos's ear. But you've kept that a secret, all of you have. Does it matter? He's a villain, the same as you. Oh, maybe you'll change your mind when I tell you the truth on who Dabai really is. Honestly, it was so fun watching you have a mental breakdown. Athos did what he did best in times like these. He stopped thinking with the knife still in his hand that the Namu had in its massive maw. He pointed the blade upwards, braced himself, and struck. His blade went up with a resounding schlick sound as he pierced the roof of the Namu's mouth, and his blade rammed high enough to at least touch the beast's brain but not kill it. The Namu, in pain, bit as hard as it could on Athos's elbow. There was a white-hot fire, a ripping noise, and next thing Athos knew he was on the ground, minus his arm. Blood came pouring out of Athos's wound, but he just didn't care when he yelled at the top of his lungs, I'm no longer leverage. Kill the son of a beach. Athena was the first to charge. Athos was losing BLD and fast. He could hardly focus on the fight that was happening just behind him. He had no idea what was happening. All he could see was red, a pool forming below him. Red. He had to stop the bleeding. Well, he didn't have to. Vet and Hitomi both came to his aid, retreating from their cover. Hitomi was the first to surprise him. She used her telekinesis to stop the BLD flow completely. Then he was under her mind control. I'm keeping you calm and still. Vet said this might hurt. Hitomi informed him as she shrunk back behind the table, which caused Athos to make the same movements as her. Vet had Izumi's belt in his hands and used the belt to make a tourniquet around Athos's BLD. Why stump it hurt? God, did it hurt? As Vet tightened the belt as much as he could, thankfully. Hitomi's quirk did help keep him calm during this. He then nodded towards Hitomi, who let Athos go. Athos was on his feet and brought behind the table with the rest of them. Idiot. Izumi hissed at him. Absolute idiot. Here, bring him to me. Fayumi demanded, and her hands became coated in ice. I can help clot the wound. You and me, Vet told her quickly before he loses more BLD. Fayumi's ice burned. It burned like fire on Athos's raw nerve ends, which made him cry out in pain. Vet had a hand on Athos's bicep as the area started to glow golden. Athos gritted his teeth so hard he was afraid they were going to break. Izumi grabbed a wooden spoon from the floor, one that got thrown when Endeavor flipped the table, and put it between Athos's mouth. Athos has been stabbed. He's been stabbed a lot, but nothing will ever compete with this pain ever. Cold sweat formed on his brow as muffled cries of pain left his mouth and the spoon started to crack between his teeth. I know. Vet tried to soothe him. A little longer, okay. Just a little longer. It's almost healed enough to stop the bleeding. He ran a hand up and down Athos's back soothingly while shushing him like he was shushing a scared animal. Hitomi's small form hugged his back from behind, and it was clear she was shaking, but she was trying her hardest to provide him some comfort. There. Fayumi's ice died down as she raised her BLD'd hands up and Vet pulled away from him. The bleeding stopped and his skin regrew around the open wound thanks to Vet. Athos let the spoon drop from his mouth as he let out a loud cough as he panted heavily like a dog in the hot sun. You know, in hindsight, that might not have been my smartest move, was the last thing Athos managed to say before he passed out completely. The attack everyone was giving All for One was quick and brutal as they all managed to get back outside of the house. Those that could fight did fight. They all threw everything they had at him. With Athena leading the charge, All for One was quick though, managing to dodge nearly every attack given to him, no doubt with the help of One for All that he had. Then, he surprised them all when he shot both ice and fire out of his right and left hands, the same as Shoto Todoroki. That's my quirk. Shoto grunted and he made sure his quirk was still with him. It was. Oh, yes, it is. All for One jumped onto the roof of a building and gave a bow like he was putting on a show. You see, I stole it from you in my world, where I ripped you clean down the middle. He laughed manically. You bastard, Kyujo roared, suddenly appearing behind All for One. Red lightning licking at all of his limbs. He then raised his hand up, like he was going to flick wind at All for One, but in a surprising move, he instead made 5 red and black tendrils with each of his fingers and shot it towards the villain. Kyujo actually managed to impale him in 3 different places between the ribs, in the shoulder, and in the leg. All for One grinned. I see something else we have in common. All for One grabbed Kyujo's tendrils with his hand and sent a surge of power up Kyujo's tendrils, and it went all the way to Kyujo, sending him flying through the air and into someone's house with a loud crash. He didn't even get to scream. It had happened that fast. It was fine though, because that gave Athena more than enough time to launch a counterattack with Deku. Alaska Athena cranked her One for All the way to 100 as bright green lighting ran all over her body and made her glow green. Montana Deku gritted between teeth as he started to look the same as her. Smash! Not just both of them, but 3 of them all screamed at once as Kyujo no Kuzuko rejoined the battle. All 3 of them went to kick All for One with all they had, ready to end this nightmare and go home. The power the 3 of them made was intense as they all went down at once on the poor house. It was so intense that they couldn't even see the damage they did until they were finished. A crater at least 10 feet wide stood with the 3 of them at the center, and All for One nowhere to be seen. Kuzuko let out loud pants as he looked around, the same as Athena and Deku. Wealth Eyes has been fun. All for One approached the edge of the crater, dodging Kaminari's lighting bolt as he did so. But duty calls and I must go, but don't worry, I'll return. He then raised his watch for all of them to see. Hit a button and he was gone. Holy shit, Kuzuko whispered as he took a step back. Talk about waking up to a nightmare. The 2 of them unfused and Izuku was back with a gasp. Where did he go? Deku whispered while the others approached the end of the crater to look down inside at the 3 of them. Athena was the one to answer. I don't know, and that scares me. All for One was panting when he returned to his own universe per Hatsume's request. Hatsume gave him a bow. How is it going? I was in the middle of a fight. I would have won, but I took an idiot's arm, so I call that a win. The watch, he demanded, and Hatsume nodded and wasted no time giving him the improved watch, swapping out the one on his wrist for the new one. With this watch you can now travel between worlds, she told him softly, and he nodded. I will put this to use. Of course, never one to waste time. All for One was gone. Once he was gone, Hatsume let out a sigh and turned towards Eddie. So are we wrong? She asked the older man. Yes, perhaps they will see it that way, but it had to be done. He's their problem now, Eddie whispered back to her as he approached the machine. The failsafe is already in effect. I hope it's enough time. I do too. I'm getting out of here. Eddie told her you should come with me before he returns. If he returns, I'm with you. I just hope he never does, because if he manages to come back, Hatsume grabbed a wrench. He's going to be mighty pissed, and with a heavy heart she smashed the transporter. I just feel bad. It shouldn't have to fall on them. Yes, dear, I agree, but we've given them an advantage, and for everyone's sake I pray those he's fighting against win.